The rope cuts into the boy's waist as flies buzz around his bare feet on the burning dirt. A scarred man's voice rises above the summer crowd. "Strong worker, no trouble, $20. Most people turn away, but 7-year-old Lily Harper doesn't. She steps forward with a peppermint candy in her outstretched hand, and her rancher father Daniel freezes. Because in that moment, everything he thought he knew about doing the right thing shatters like glass. One choice, one boy, and a summer that will burn down everything they thought was safe. If you want to see how far this story reaches, hit that like button and comment your city below. Now let me tell you what happened next. The heat pressed down on Silver Ridge like a hand made of brass and broken promises. Daniel Harper had lived through 37 summers in Montana Territory, and this one felt meaner than most. The kind that made horses irritable and men shorter-tempered. The kind that turned the grass brittle and the water scarce. He'd come to town for supplies, same as every Saturday, and he'd brought Lily because leaving her alone at the ranch made him nervous ever since Margaret died. That was 2 years ago now. 2 years of learning to braid hair wrong and burn breakfast and wake up in the middle of the night reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore. Lily held his hand as they walked through the market square, her small fingers sticky with sweat and summer dust. She was talking about the chickens again, how the brown one was mean but the spotted one was nice, how she'd named them all, even though Daniel told her not to name animals you might have to eat someday. But she named them anyway because that's what 7-year-olds did, and because she had her mother's stubborn streak running right down to her bones. "The spotted one laid 3 eggs yesterday," Lily said, hopping over a dried puddle that had probably been mud back in April. "I think she likes me best." "That's so." Daniel adjusted the brim of his hat against the glare. The sun sat white and vicious in a sky the color of bleached canvas. "Mm-hmm. She makes a special sound when I come in, like she's saying hello." Daniel smiled despite the heat, despite the ache that never quite left his chest. This was the best part of town days, just walking with his daughter, listening to her chatter about chickens and clouds and whatever else caught her magpie mind. In these moments, he could almost forget the empty chair at the dinner table, the quiet that filled the house after she went to bed, the loneliness that sat on his chest like a stone. The market square buzzed with the usual Saturday chaos. Vendors hawked vegetables and tools and dubious miracle tonics. Dogs nosed through the dirt for scraps. Someone was selling apple cider at 2 cents a cup, and the smell of it mixed with horse manure and tobacco smoke and the peculiar dry scent of summer heat baking everything to dust. Daniel steered them toward the dry goods store. He needed flour and coffee, maybe some sugar if the price wasn't robbery. Lily pressed close to his side, suddenly quieter, and he glanced down to see what had caught her attention. That's when he heard the voice. "Step right up, strong back, good hands, no trouble at all." The voice belonged to a man standing on the back of a wagon near the edge of the square, big-shouldered and leather-faced, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw like someone had tried to split his head open and given up halfway. He wore a dusty black coat despite the heat, and his teeth showed yellow when he smiled. "Young worker here, bargain price for quick sale." Daniel's gut went cold. On a wooden crate beside the wagon stood a boy. He couldn't have been more than 9 years old. Thin as a fence post, barefoot, wearing trousers 3 sizes too big, held up with rope. His shirt had been white once, maybe, but now it carried the gray-brown color of old dirt and older neglect. His hair hung lank around a face that might have been any child's face, except for the eyes. The boy's eyes were old, ancient, the kind of eyes you saw on men who'd been to war, or on animals that had been beaten too many times to fight back. And there was a rope, thick hemp rope, tied around the boy's waist like you'd tie a dog. The other end was wrapped around the scarred man's fist. Daniel stopped walking, his hand tightened on Lily's. "What's that man doing?" Lily asked. Her voice had gone small and uncertain. "Don't look, sweetheart. Come on." But Lily wasn't moving. She stared at the boy on the crate with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. Something between confusion and the peculiar clarity children sometimes have about things adults have learned to ignore. "Work him in the fields. Work him in the mine. Work him wherever you need," the scarred man continued. His voice carried across the square, but most people just walked faster, eyes down, faces carefully blank. "Clean worker, disease-free, guaranteed." The boy swayed slightly in the heat. A fly landed on his shoulder. He didn't brush it away. "Daddy," Lily whispered, Why does that boy have a rope? Daniel's throat felt tight. Some people do bad things, Lily. We can't fix all of it. But come on now. He tried to move them along, but Lily had planted her feet the way she did when she absolutely refused to budge. Margaret used to do the same thing. Daniel recognized the set of her jaw, the straight line of her small shoulders. $20 takes him home today. The scarred man's eyes swept the crowd. 15 if you pay cash right now. The boy's gaze drifted across the market square like he was looking at something very far away, something none of them could see. His lips were cracked. Dust covered his bare feet. Under the too big shirt, his collarbones stood out like rails. And then Lily did something that stopped Daniel's heart in his chest. She let go of his hand. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a peppermint candy. The one she'd been saving since Wednesday, the one she'd made him promise not to forget was hers. She'd been planning to eat it tonight on the porch while they watched the stars. Lily, no! But she was already walking toward the wagon, small and fearless in her faded blue dress, weaving between the adults who wouldn't look at what was happening, who had learned how to make themselves blind. Daniel's heart hammered. He moved after her, but Lily was quicker. She stopped in front of the crate. The boy looked down at her. For a moment, something flickered in those ancient eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or the ghost of what surprise used to be. Lily held up the peppermint candy. Here, she said. You can have it. The scarred man laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Ain't that sweet? But the boy don't need charity, little girl. He needs an owner. You want to buy him, or are you just wasting my time? The boy stared at the candy. His throat moved as he swallowed. Daniel reached them. His hand found Lily's shoulder, but she shrugged it off gently, still holding the candy out like an offering, like a bridge across some terrible distance. Take it, she said to the boy. It's okay. The boy's hand moved, slow, uncertain, like he expected to be hit. His fingers were filthy, nails broken. When he took the candy, Lily smiled at him. Something cracked open in Daniel's chest. He looked at the scarred man, then at the rope, then at the boy's bare feet on the hot crate, the bruises on his arms, the exhaustion carved into every line of his too thin body. Most people were walking past now, pretending they didn't see, pretending this was normal, or at least normal enough that it wasn't their problem. Daniel thought about Margaret, about the last thing she'd said to him before the fever took her so fast he barely had time to understand she was dying. Take care of our girl. Teach her to be brave. He thought about Lily's hand letting go of his to offer kindness to a stranger. He thought about the kind of man he wanted to be, the kind of man he wanted his daughter to remember. Then he looked at the scarred man and said, I'll buy him. The words came out steady, calm, like he'd made this decision years ago and was only now getting around to saying it out loud. The scarred man's eyebrows lifted. That's so. Well, now that's more like it. $20 and he's... No. Daniel's voice went hard. No sale. I'm taking him. And you're going to walk away and be grateful I don't get the sheriff. The scarred man's smile disappeared. His hand tightened on the rope. You threatening me? I'm telling you how this goes. Let go of the rope. The square had gone quieter. People were stopping now, turning to watch. Daniel felt their eyes on his back, felt the weight of what he was doing settle on his shoulders like a yoke. The scarred man took a step forward. He was bigger than Daniel, meaner looking, and probably used to getting his way through size and violence. This boy's my property. I got papers. Papers saying you can sell children like livestock? Daniel's voice rose. That what your papers say? Legal guardianship, signed by a judge. Then the judge made a mistake. The scarred man's face darkened. His free hand drifted toward his belt, toward the knife Daniel could now see tucked there. But Daniel had spent 2 years carrying grief like a stone. 2 years of waking up alone and watching his daughter try to be brave when she was scared at night and learning to live with the empty spaces. Something in him had hardened. Something had turned to iron. You pull that knife, Daniel said quietly, and we'll see who walks away. For a long moment, nobody moved. The summer heat pressed down. Flies buzzed. Somewhere a horse whinnied. Then a voice cut through the tension. Problem here, Daniel. Daniel didn't turn, but he recognized the voice. Tom Bradley, the blacksmith. Big man, good hands, steady temperament. No problem, Daniel said. Just conducting some business. Looks to me like you're stealing my property, the scarred man said, but his hand had moved away from the knife. Looks to me, Tom said, moving to stand beside Daniel, like you're trying to sell a child in the middle of town, and I'm wondering what Sheriff Hastings would say about that. More people were gathering now. Doc Morrison, the town physician, Sarah Chen, who ran the general store, old Pastor Williams from the church, a handful of others, forming a loose circle around the wagon. The scarred man looked around. His jaw worked. Daniel could see him calculating, weighing his options, trying to decide if this was worth the fight. Finally, his lips pulled back from those yellow teeth. You're making a mistake. He ain't worth the trouble. That's my concern. His brother's still working the mine, you know that? You take this one, you're just splitting them up worse. Daniel felt Lily's hand slip back into his. He squeezed her fingers. Where's this mine? He asked. The scarred man laughed, that grinding rock sound again. Even if I told you, you couldn't do nothing about it. Victor Rourke owns that operation, and Rourke owns everything in those mountains. He's got papers for every single one of them kids. Legal as Sunday church. The name sent a chill through Daniel despite the heat. Everyone in Montana Territory had heard of Victor Rourke, mining baron, land grabber, the kind of man who built empires on other people's backs and didn't care who got crushed in the process. Cut the rope, Daniel said. You're going to regret. Cut the rope or I'll cut it for you. For another heartbeat, the scarred man stood there, fury radiating off him like heat shimmer. Then he pulled a knife from his belt, the same knife he'd been reaching for earlier, and sliced through the hemp in one vicious motion. The rope fell away from the boy's waist. He swayed like the rope had been the only thing holding him up. He's damaged goods anyway, the scarred man said, climbing onto his wagon. Weak constitution, probably won't last the winter. He gathered the reins. But you tell Rourke I did my job. Tell him I tried to sell the runaway like he wanted, and tell him... He smiled that terrible yellow smile. Tell him I know where to find the one that got away now. The wagon rolled off, wheels grinding through the dust, leaving parallel tracks that would last until the next rain, which might be weeks, the way this summer was going. Daniel stood there with his daughter's hand in his, and a strange boy standing on a crate in front of him, and he wondered what exactly he'd just done. The boy still held the peppermint candy. He hadn't unwrapped it. He just stood there, skinny and silent and ancient-eyed, looking at Daniel like he was trying to solve an impossible equation. It's okay, Lily said. You can get down now. The boy didn't move. Daniel stepped forward slowly, the way you'd approach a half-wild horse. Son, he said gently. What's your name? No answer, just that 1,000-yard stare. He probably don't talk much, Tom Bradley said. Look at him. He's half-starved and scared to death. Doc Morrison moved closer, his medical bag already in hand. Let me take a look at him, Daniel. Make sure nothing's broken. But when the doctor reached out, the boy flinched so hard he nearly fell off the crate. His hand went up to shield his face, and Daniel saw the fear there, pure and terrible, and learned through repetition. Easy, Daniel said. Nobody's going to hurt you. Doc Morrison here, he's just going to make sure you're all right. That okay? The boy's eyes darted between them, calculating, measuring, trying to determine which threat was most immediate. Lily let go of Daniel's hand again. She climbed up onto the crate beside the boy, just scrambled right up there like it was the most natural thing in the world. I'm Lily, she announced. That's my daddy. He's nice. And that's Doc Morrison. And he fixed my arm when I fell out of the hayloft last year. See? She held up her arm, showing an invisible scar. All better now. The boy looked at her, really looked at her, like he was seeing her for the first time. Do you have a name? Lily asked. For a long moment, nothing. Then, so quiet, Daniel almost missed it. Jonah. The word came out scratchy and unused, like his voice had nearly forgotten how to make sounds that mattered. Jonah, Lily repeated, testing it out. That's a good name. You want to come to our ranch? We have chickens and horses, and my daddy makes really bad pancakes, but they're not that bad if you put enough syrup on them. Despite everything, despite the fear and the heat and the strangeness of this entire situation, Daniel almost smiled. Jonah's fingers tightened on the peppermint candy. Ranch? Mm-hmm. It's real pretty, and there's a creek where we can catch frogs. Lily held out her hand. Come on, let's go home. Daniel watched his daughter, this small, fierce creature who had her mother's eyes and her mother's heart, offer her hand to a boy who'd been sold like livestock in the summer heat. And he watched Jonah, this thin child with ancient eyes, look at that outstretched hand like it might be a trick, like kindness might be the cruelest trap of all. Finally, slowly, Jonah took Lily's hand. She helped him down from the crate. His bare feet hit the dust and he winced. The ground was hot enough to burn. Without thinking, Daniel shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders, even though the day was scorching. The boy needed something, some gesture of safety. "Can you walk?" Doc Morrison asked gently. Jonah nodded. But when he took a step, his legs nearly gave out. Too many hours standing on that crate. Too many days of whatever had come before. Daniel moved without thinking. He picked the boy up, light as kindling, nothing to him at all, and settled him against his chest. Jonah went rigid with fear. "It's okay," Daniel said. "I'm just carrying you to the wagon. That all right?" Jonah didn't answer, but he didn't fight either. Just held that peppermint candy like it was made of gold and stared at Daniel's face like he was memorizing it, preparing for the moment when this kindness would reveal itself as something else. The walk back through the market felt longer than it should have. People stared. Some nodded approval. Others looked away, uncomfortable with what Daniel's actions implied about their own inaction. Sarah Chen pressed a canteen of water into Daniel's free hand. Pastor Williams promised to stop by the ranch tomorrow. Tom Bradley walked with them to Daniel's wagon. "You know what you're doing?" he asked quietly. "No," Daniel admitted. "No idea at all. That man mentioned Victor Rourke. If Rourke's involved, I know." "Daniel, Rourke's got connections, money, power. If he wants this boy back, then he'll have to come through me first." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "You need help, you call. I mean it. Appreciated." At the wagon, Daniel set Jonah down gently on the bench seat. The boy's fingers had gone white around the peppermint candy. Lily climbed up beside him, chattering about the ranch, about the chickens, about anything and everything to fill the terrible silence. Daniel gathered the reins. The supplies he'd meant to buy sat forgotten back at the dry goods store. He'd have to come back next week. Right now, all that mattered was getting this boy home, getting him safe, getting him fed and cleaned and rested. He clicked his tongue and the horses started forward. The wagon creaked. Dust rose in their wake. Jonah sat between them, shoulders hunched, eyes forward, still clutching that candy. "You can eat it if you want," Lily said. "It's really good. Peppermint's my favorite." Jonah looked at the candy. Then, with movements that suggested this might be a test, he carefully unwrapped it. The paper crinkled. He put the candy in his mouth. His eyes closed. Just for a second, like the simple sweetness of peppermint was almost too much to bear. When he opened them again, there were tears on his cheeks. "It's okay," Lily said, taking his hand again. "It's okay to cry. Daddy cries sometimes too. I hear him at night when he thinks I'm sleeping." Daniel's throat went tight. He kept his eyes on the road, on the long ribbon of dirt leading home. The sun beat down. The wagon wheels turned, and somewhere behind them, Silver Ridge faded into the heat shimmer, carrying its secrets and its shame into another summer evening. The ranch appeared on the horizon like a promise. Weathered barn, small house, split rail fences marking the boundaries of Daniel's life. Not much, maybe, but it was honest work and honest land, and it had been enough for him and Margaret and Lily. Now there was one more. Jonah had fallen asleep against Lily's shoulder somewhere around mile 3. She'd wrapped her arm around him like she was protecting something precious, and Daniel had let the horses find their own pace home, in no hurry to disturb the first peace the boy had probably known in months. When they pulled into the yard, Jonah woke with a start, panic flashing across his face. "Easy," Daniel said. "We're home. You're safe." Jonah looked around at the ranch, the barn with its doors open to catch any breeze, the chicken coop where Lily's hens scratched and muttered, the house with its covered porch, and the rocking chair where Margaret used to sit in the evenings. His expression was unreadable. "Come on," Lily said, hopping down. "I'll show you everything." Daniel helped Jonah down from the wagon. The boy's legs were steadier now, but he moved carefully, like someone who'd learned that sudden movements brought punishment. Inside, the house was dim and cool, a relief after the brutal sun. Daniel lit a lamp while Lily gave Jonah the grand tour, pointing out the kitchen table, the stone fireplace, the rag rug her mother had made years ago. "And that's the pump," Lily said, gesturing toward the sink. "We have to pump it 17 times to get the water flowing good." I counted. Jonah stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking lost. Daniel pulled out a chair. "Sit down, son. Let me get you something to eat." The boy sat slowly, like he expected the chair to be pulled away. Daniel rummaged through the cupboards and came up with bread, butter, some cold chicken left from last night's dinner. He set it in front of Jonah. The boy stared at the food. "Go ahead," Daniel said gently. Jonah's hand moved toward the bread, then stopped. His eyes darted to Daniel, seeking permission or waiting for the trick. "It's yours," Daniel said. "Eat as much as you want." Still Jonah hesitated. Then, like a dam breaking, he grabbed the bread and tore into it with desperate hunger, barely chewing, just cramming food into his mouth like someone might take it away. "Slow down," Daniel said, alarmed. "You'll make yourself sick." But Jonah couldn't slow down, or wouldn't. He ate like a boy who'd learned that food was scarce and temporary, that you took what you could when you could, because tomorrow might bring nothing. When the bread was gone, he started on the chicken. His fingers shook. Lily watched with wide eyes. "Daddy, he's really hungry." "I can see that, sweetheart." When the plate was finally empty, Jonah sat back, breathing hard. His eyes had gone glassy. Daniel barely got the bucket under him before the boy vomited everything back up. Too much food, too fast, on a stomach that had forgotten what full felt like. Jonah curled in on himself, shame and fear radiating off him in waves. "It's okay," Daniel said, wiping the boy's mouth with a damp cloth. "It's not your fault. We'll try again in a bit, slower this time." But Jonah was crying now, silent, terrible tears that shook his thin shoulders. Daniel did the only thing he could think of. He pulled the boy close and held him while he cried. Jonah fought it at first, tried to pull away, but Daniel held on gently, steadily, until the boy finally collapsed against him and sobbed like his heart was breaking. Lily pressed close too, her small hand on Jonah's back. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're home now. You're home." Outside, the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains. The chickens settled into their roost. The horses found shade beneath the cottonwood tree. And in the small kitchen of a Montana ranch, a man held a broken boy while his daughter whispered comfort, and none of them knew that this was just the beginning. That night, after Daniel had given Jonah a careful bath, noting the bruises, the scars, the evidence of systematic cruelty, and dressed him in one of Lily's old nightshirts that still swallowed him whole, they settled the boy in the small room that had been meant for a second child. Margaret and Daniel had always planned for more children. The room had waited, empty and hoping, and then Margaret died, and the hope died with her. Now there was a boy in that bed, small and scared, and finally, mercifully, asleep. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching Jonah's chest rise and fall. Lily appeared beside him in her own nightgown, her hair braided for bed. "Is he going to stay?" she whispered. "I don't know, sweetheart. I want him to stay." Daniel looked down at his daughter. "Me too." "That man said there's a brother. In the mine." Daniel had been trying not to think about that, about the other children, about whatever hell Jonah had escaped from, and what it meant that others were still there. "I know. We should help them." "Lily, Mama would have helped them." The words hit like a fist to the chest, because it was true. Margaret would have marched up into those mountains herself, consequences be damned, and come back with every last child or die trying. "Get some sleep," Daniel said finally. "We'll figure it out tomorrow." But after Lily went to bed, Daniel sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey he didn't drink and stared at the stars and wondered what exactly he'd brought into his home. A boy with ancient eyes and fresh scars, a connection to Victor Rourke, the most dangerous man in Montana territory, and the knowledge that somewhere in the mountains there were other children, other boys and girls working in darkness, breathing dust, dying slowly while the world pretended not to see. The summer night pressed close, warm and thick with the sound of crickets. Daniel thought about the rope around Jonah's waist, about Lily's outstretched hand offering a peppermint candy, about the choice he'd made in that dusty market square. He thought about Margaret's last words. take care of our girl. Teach her to be brave. Well, he'd taught her something today. Or maybe she'd taught him. Either way, there was no going back now. The whiskey sat untouched. The stars turned in their ancient patterns. And inside the house, a boy who'd been sold like livestock slept in a real bed for the first time in longer than anyone should have to count. Tomorrow would bring questions, complications, maybe danger. But tonight, Daniel Harper sat on his porch and made a promise to the summer darkness. Whatever came next, that boy would not go back. Whatever it cost, whatever it took, Jonah was home now. And home meant safe. Even if Daniel had to burn down half of Montana territory to keep it that way. The sun rose hot and relentless the next morning, flooding through the kitchen window where Daniel stood frying eggs and trying not to burn them. He'd been awake since 4, unable to sleep, his mind cycling through everything that had happened yesterday and everything that might happen today. Lily appeared first, barefoot and sleepy-eyed, her braid coming loose. "Is Jonah awake? Haven't heard him yet. Can I go check on him?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Knock first. Don't startle him." She patted down the hallway, and Daniel heard the soft rap of knuckles on wood, then Lily's voice, gentle and bright. "Jonah? You awake? Daddy's making breakfast." No response that Daniel could hear. Then Lily's footsteps returning. "He's just sitting on the bed," she reported, staring at the wall. Daniel turned down the heat on the stove. "Let me talk to him." He found Jonah exactly as Lily described, perched on the edge of the narrow bed, still wearing the nightshirt, his bare feet not quite touching the floor. The morning light cut across his face, showing the bruises more clearly than yesterday's chaos had allowed. Purple and yellow marks on his arms, a cut on his cheek that was trying to heal. His hair, clean now, fell across his forehead in dark tangles. "Morning," Daniel said from the doorway. "You sleep all right?" Jonah's eyes flicked to him, then away. No answer. Daniel stepped into the room slowly, giving the boy space. "I know everything's strange right now. New place, new people, but you're safe here. I need you to understand that." Still nothing. Just that ancient stare fixed on some point beyond the wall. "Are you hungry? I made breakfast. Eggs and toast. We'll go slow this time. Make sure your stomach can handle it." Finally, a small nod. "Good. Come on out when you're ready." Daniel started to leave, then stopped. "Jonah? That man yesterday, the one with the scar, he said something about a brother. Is that true?" The change was instant. Jonah's whole body went rigid, his hands fisting in the nightshirt. His breathing quickened. "Easy," Daniel said. "I'm not trying to upset you. I just need to know what we're dealing with here." Jonah's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Ethan. That's your brother's name? Ethan?" A nod. "And he's still at the mine?" Another nod, and now there were tears sliding down Jonah's cheeks, silent and desperate. Daniel crossed the room and knelt beside the bed, putting himself at the boy's eye level. "Listen to me. If your brother's in trouble, if there are other kids in trouble, I want to help, but I need to understand what happened. Can you tell me about it?" Jonah shook his head violently. "Can't. He'll come. He'll take us back." "Who will? Rourke?" The name made Jonah flinch like he'd been slapped. He pulled his knees up to his chest, making himself small. Daniel's jaw tightened. Whatever had happened to this boy, whoever this Victor Rourke was, the fear went bone deep. "Okay," he said gently. "We don't have to talk about it right now, but Jonah, I promise you, nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go. You understand me?" Jonah looked at him with those old eyes, trying to decide if promises meant anything at all. "Come on," Daniel said, standing. "Let's get some food in you." Breakfast was a careful affair. Daniel gave Jonah small portions, a single scrambled egg, half a piece of toast, and made him eat slowly, pausing between bites. Lily kept up a steady stream of chatter about the chickens, about how the brown one was being especially mean this morning, about how she wanted to take Jonah down to the creek later to look for tadpoles. Jonah ate mechanically, his eyes tracking every movement Daniel made, waiting for the kindness to crack and reveal something uglier underneath. They were clearing the plates when hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Jonah went white. He pushed back from the table so fast his chair toppled over, then bolted toward the hallway like a spooked animal. "Jonah, wait!" Daniel started, but the boy had already disappeared into his room, the door slamming shut. Lily's eyes were wide. "Daddy?" "Stay inside," Daniel said, moving to the window. Relief flooded through him when he saw who it was. Tom Bradley climbed down from his horse, and behind him came Doc Morrison in his buggy and Pastor Williams on foot, and surprisingly, Sheriff Ben Hastings, a lean man with gray whiskers and a perpetual squint. Daniel stepped onto the porch. "Gentlemen?" "Morning, Daniel," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "Hope you don't mind the early visit. Heard you had some excitement in town yesterday. News travels fast. Always does." Hastings looked around the yard, taking in the ranch with the practiced eye of someone used to assessing situations. "The boy here?" "Inside. He's scared half to death. Won't talk much." Doc Morrison hefted his medical bag. "I'd like to examine him properly, if you'll allow it. What I saw yesterday in the market square looked like systematic abuse." "He's got bruises and scars all over," Daniel confirmed. "And he's half starved. Couldn't keep food down last night." Pastor Williams shook his head sadly. "The wickedness of men knows no bounds." They moved inside, boots heavy on the wooden floor. Lily hovered near the hallway, protective. "He's really scared," she told them. "You have to be nice." "We will be, sweetheart," Doc Morrison promised. Daniel knocked on Jonah's door. "Jonah? It's Daniel. I've got some friends here who want to help." "Doc Morrison, you remember him from yesterday? He needs to check you over, make sure you're healing all right. Is that okay?" No answer. "I'm coming in," Daniel said gently. "Just me first." He opened the door to find Jonah pressed into the corner, knees drawn up, eyes wild with panic. "Hey," Daniel said softly. "Nobody's going to hurt you. Doc Morrison is a good man. He just wants to help." "They'll take me back," Jonah whispered. "They always take us back." The words landed like stones. "Who's they, son? Who takes you back?" But Jonah just shook his head, tears streaming now. Daniel sat down on the floor, keeping his distance, making himself less threatening. "Listen to me. I know you've got no reason to trust anyone. I know the world's taught you that kindness is a lie. But I'm telling you, I swear to you on my daughter's life, nobody here is going to hurt you or send you back to wherever you came from." "You can't stop him," Jonah said. "Nobody can stop him. He has papers. The law says we belong to him." Sheriff Hastings appeared in the doorway. "The law," he said carefully, "says a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're all right." Jonah stared at the sheriff's badge, and fresh terror flooded his face. "Easy now," Hastings said, holding up his hands. "I'm not here to arrest anyone, just trying to understand what's going on." "Sheriff Hastings is a fair man," Daniel said. "He wants to help." But Jonah was shaking his head again, backing further into the corner like he could disappear through the wall if he just tried hard enough. Doc Morrison pushed past the men and knelt down, setting his bag aside. "Jonah," he said in the gentle voice he probably used with frightened patience, "I know you're scared, but I'm a doctor. That means I help people. That's all I want to do, help you. Will you let me?" For a long moment, nothing. Then, so quietly they almost missed it. "Will it hurt?" "No," Doc Morrison said. "I'm just going to look at your bruises and cuts, maybe listen to your breathing. No needles, no pain, I promise." Slowly, incrementally, Jonah's rigid posture eased. He didn't move from the corner, but he stopped trying to press through the wall. "Can Miss Lily stay?" he asked. Daniel glanced at his daughter, who had appeared behind the sheriff despite being told to stay back. "If you want her here, she can stay." Lily slipped past the adults and sat down next to Jonah, taking his hand. "I'll stay right here," she said. The whole time. Doc Morrison worked with quiet efficiency, checking Jonah over while explaining everything he was doing. The bruises were old, he noted grimly, layered on top of each other, evidence of repeated beatings. The boy was severely malnourished. His lungs sounded weak, probably from breathing dust or bad air. There were scars on his back that looked like marks from a belt or switch. "How old are you, son?" the doctor asked. 9, Jonah whispered. "I think. Maybe 10. You don't know for sure?" "Lost track." The adults exchanged looks above his head. Daniel felt something cold and hard settling in his chest. When the examination was done, they moved back to the kitchen, leaving Lily with Jonah. The boy had asked her to stay. and she'd agreed with the solemnity of someone taking an oath. "Well?" Daniel asked when they were out of earshot. Doc Morrison's face was grim. "That child's been systematically abused for months, maybe longer. The scarring suggests repeated beatings. The malnutrition is severe. He's probably a year behind where he should be developmentally, and his lungs—" He shook his head. "If he's been working in a mine, breathing in dust and bad air, there could be permanent damage." "Can you testify to that?" Sheriff Hastings asked. "In court, I mean." "Absolutely. But Ben, if what Daniels told me is true, if Victor Rourke's got legal guardianship papers, then we need to challenge those papers," Hastings said flatly, "because I don't care what some judge signed. This is wrong." Tom Bradley leaned against the kitchen counter. "Rourke's got money and influence. He owns half the territorial legislature. Going after him won't be easy." "Since when did you care about easy?" Hastings shot back. "I don't. I'm just saying we need to be smart about this." Pastor Williams cleared his throat. "Daniel, the boy mentioned others. A brother named Ethan, and possibly more children at this mine. Do we know where it's located?" "Somewhere in the mountains," Daniel said. "That's all the man with the scar said before he left." "The man with the scar," Hastings said thoughtfully. "Big fellow? Scar running down his left cheek? That's him? Name's Jack Reeves. He's one of Rourke's enforcers. Handles the dirty work Rourke doesn't want directly connected to his name." Hastings paused. "If Reeves was trying to sell the boy in town, it means Jonah escaped from somewhere, which means Rourke's going to want him back." "Over my dead body," Daniel said quietly. "Might come to that," Hastings warned. "Rourke doesn't take kindly to losing property. Even if that property is human beings, he's got no right to own." "So what do we do?" Tom asked. Doc Morrison set his medical bag on the table. "First, we document everything. I'll write up a full medical report on Jonah's condition. If this goes to court, we need evidence. Second," Hastings said, "we find out exactly what papers Rourke's working under. If there's a guardianship order, there's got to be a file at the courthouse. I'll go through the records, see what we're dealing with. And third," Pastor Williams added, "we find out where this mine is and how many children are there. If we're going to fight this, we need the full picture." Daniel looked at each of them in turn. "Why are you doing this? All of you. This isn't your fight." Tom Bradley met his eyes. "You stood up in that market square yesterday when everyone else was looking away. That makes it our fight too." "Besides," Doc Morrison said, "I took an oath to do no harm. Letting children suffer when I can help? That's harm." Hastings nodded. "And I swore to uphold the law. The real law, not whatever twisted version Rourke's bought and paid for." Something tight in Daniel's chest eased slightly. He wasn't alone in this. Whatever came next, he had help. "All right," he said. "Let's get to work." The men dispersed with their assignments, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts and two children in the other room. He started cleaning up the breakfast dishes, but his hand stilled over the wash basin as he heard Lily's voice drifting down the hallway. "Do you want to see the chickens now? The spotted one laid another egg this morning. I think she likes you already." A pause, then Jonah's voice, so quiet Daniel had to strain to hear. "How do you know she likes me?" "She's never met me." "Because she's a good chicken," Lily said with complete certainty. "And good chickens can tell when someone needs a friend." Daniel smiled despite everything. Trust his daughter to find logic in the illogical. Over the next 3 days, patterns emerged. Jonah would wake before dawn, disoriented and frightened until he remembered where he was. He ate slowly, carefully, his stomach gradually accepting regular meals. He followed Lily around the ranch like a shadow, watching her feed the chickens, collect eggs, help with small chores. He spoke rarely, and when he did, it was in whispers. But at night, the nightmares came. Daniel would wake to screams from the spare room, raw, terrified sounds that sent him running. He'd find Jonah tangled in sheets, fighting invisible enemies, crying out names. Ethan, Marcus, Sarah. Other names Daniel didn't recognize, but that seemed to carry terrible weight. "It's okay," Daniel would say, sitting on the edge of the bed, careful not to touch until Jonah calmed enough to remember where he was. "You're safe. You're at the ranch. Nobody's going to hurt you." Sometimes Jonah would cry after waking. Sometimes he'd just sit there, hollow-eyed and shaking. Once he looked at Daniel and said, "They're still there. All of them. still in the dark. We're going to help them, Daniel promised. I swear it. You can't, Jonah said with terrible certainty. He's too strong. He owns everything. On the fourth day, Sheriff Hastings returned with news. Found the guardianship papers, he said, spreading documents across Daniel's kitchen table. Signed 3 years ago by Judge Samuel Merrick, giving Victor Rourke legal custody of orphaned children for the purpose of education and vocational training. Daniel's hands clenched. Vocational training. Is that what we're calling child slavery now? Apparently. The papers list 43 names. 43 children handed over to Rourke's care. Hastings' voice dripped with disgust. Most of them orphans from the territorial orphanage over in Helena, some runaways. A few whose parents died of disease or mining accidents and left no family. Can we challenge it? We can try, but Merrick's still on the bench. He's not going to want to admit he made a mistake, especially one this big. Tom Bradley, who'd accompanied the sheriff, leaned forward. What if we brought proof? Witnesses, medical testimony, evidence of abuse. It might work, Hastings said, but we'd need to prove systematic abuse, not just one boy's injuries. We'd need to show that Rourke's entire operation is criminal. Then we need to find that mine, Daniel said. I might be able to help with that, Tom said. I've got a cousin who works supply routes up in the mountains. If there's a mining operation big enough for 40-some children, he'd know where. Talk to him, Hastings said. But be discreet. If Rourke gets wind that we're poking around... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of copper and gold, Daniel found Jonah sitting on the porch steps, staring toward the mountains. Lily was inside helping with dinner, giving them a rare moment alone. Daniel sat down beside him. Pretty sunset. Jonah didn't respond. Tom Bradley thinks he can find the mine where you came from, Daniel said carefully. If we can find it, we might be able to help your brother. Help all of them. Jonah's jaw tightened. You'll die if you try. Maybe, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Why? Jonah turned to look at him, genuine confusion in his eyes. Why do you care? We're nothing to you. You're not nothing, Daniel said firmly. You're a child. You deserve safety and food and a bed that's yours. So does your brother. So do all those other kids. People don't help, Jonah said. Not really. They look away. They pretend they don't see. Some people do, but not everyone. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. Then, my mama used to say that, before she died. She said there was good in the world. You just had to look for it. His voice cracked. I stopped looking. Daniel's throat went tight. When did she die? 3 years ago. Fever. Papa was already gone. Mine collapsed when I was 5. After Mama died, they took us to the orphanage. Me and Ethan. Told us we'd be taken care of. He laughed bitterly. 2 months later, a man came. Said he was giving us a better life. Jobs, training, a future. Victor Rourke. We didn't know his name then. Just that he seemed important, official. The orphanage people were happy to be rid of us. One less mouth to feed. Jonah's hands were shaking now. He took 20 of us that first time. Put us in wagons, drove us up into the mountains, and then he stopped, unable to continue. You don't have to tell me, Daniel said gently. Yes, I do. Jonah's voice strengthened with something like defiance. Someone has to know. Someone has to remember them. Daniel waited. The mine's in a valley, Jonah said. Hidden. You can't see it from any road. There's barracks where we sleep, if you can call it sleeping. 40, 50 kids in one room, some as young as 6. We work in shifts, down in the tunnels, digging, hauling ore. The little ones sort rocks. The bigger ones work the carts. How long are the shifts? 12 hours? Sometimes more if the quotas aren't met. Jonah's voice had gone flat, reciting facts like they were someone else's story. If you don't work, you don't eat. If you fight back, they beat you. If you try to run, what happens if you try to run? They catch you, bring you back, make an example. Jonah's breath hitched. Was a boy, named Marcus. He tried to run last winter. They caught him in the snow. Brought him back and beat him in front of everyone so we'd know what happens to runners. Is Marcus? He died 2 weeks later. They said it was pneumonia, but we all knew it was from the beating. Daniel felt sick. How did you escape? Ethan planned it. He's 14, almost 15, oldest in the barracks. The other kids look up to him. Pride crept into Jonah's voice. He figured out the guards' patterns, knew there was a 15-minute gap during shift change, told me to run during that gap, head for town, find help. He stayed behind. Someone had to create the distraction, make sure the guards didn't notice I was gone until I had a head start. Jonah's voice broke. I told him to come with me, but he said they'd notice if both of us were missing, said I was faster, smaller, had a better chance. You tried to get help. I ran for 2 days, sleeping in ditches, eating whatever I could find. By the time I got to Silver Ridge, I was so tired I could barely stand. That's when Reeves found me, grabbed me right off the street, said Rourke wanted his property back, but since I'd caused so much trouble, he'd try to sell me first, recoup the loss. Until Lily gave you that candy. Until Lily gave me that candy, Jonah echoed. He looked at Daniel. Why did she do that? Why did you? Because it was right. Things being right doesn't make them happen. Not in my world. Maybe, Daniel said, it's time you got a new world. Jonah's eyes filled with tears. They're still there, Ethan, the little ones, all of them, still in the dark, still breathing dust, still waiting for someone to save them. Then we'll save them. You can't. I told you. Watch me. The determination in Daniel's voice made Jonah pause. He studied the rancher's face, looking for the crack, the moment when the promise would reveal itself as hollow. But Daniel met his gaze steadily. I don't make promises I can't keep. If your brother's in that mine, we'll get him out. We'll get all of them out. And then what? Where will they go? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. Lily appeared in the doorway. Dinner's ready. They went inside, and Daniel watched Jonah take his seat at the table, no longer hesitating, no longer waiting for permission. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. That night, after the children were in bed, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and wrote 2 letters. The first went to the territorial governor, outlining what he knew about Rourke's operation and requesting an investigation. The second went to a newspaper editor in Helena, a man Daniel had met years ago who'd struck him as someone who cared about truth. He didn't know if either letter would help, but doing nothing wasn't an option anymore. A week passed. Tom's cousin confirmed the location of Rourke's mine, a valley called Black Creek, 3 days' ride into the mountains. Sheriff Hastings began quietly gathering deputies who could be trusted. Doc Morrison compiled his medical report, documenting Jonah's injuries with clinical precision, and Jonah began to talk. Slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, he told them everything. The layout of the camp, the number of guards, the names of the children he could remember, where the food was stored, where the guards slept, when the shifts changed. There's something else, he said one evening. In the mine office, Rourke keeps a ledger. What kind of ledger? Hastings asked. Names. All the children who've worked there. And, Jonah's voice dropped, and the ones who died. He keeps records, for his bookkeeping, I think. Each child is worth a certain amount of work. When they die, he notes the loss. Like inventory, Daniel said, disgusted. If we could get that ledger, Hastings said thoughtfully, it'd be proof, undeniable evidence of what he's doing. It's locked in his office, Jonah said. But during the day shift, when most of the men are supervising in the tunnels, there's usually only one guard outside. Plans began to form. Dangerous plans, desperate plans, but plans nonetheless. On the 8th day, everything changed. Daniel was in the barn, mucking stalls, while Lily and Jonah collected eggs, when he heard hoofbeats. Multiple horses, riding fast. He set down the pitchfork and walked to the barn door. His blood went cold. 5 riders approached. At the front rode a man Daniel recognized from newspaper photographs. Victor Rourke himself. Tall and distinguished looking, with silver hair and expensive clothes that seemed wildly out of place on a Montana ranch. Behind him rode Jack Reeves, the scarred man from the market, and 3 other hard-looking men with guns on their hips. Get in the house, Daniel called to the children. Now. Lily grabbed Jonah's hand and ran. Daniel walked out to meet the riders, his heart pounding, but his face calm. Rourke pulled his horse to a stop, looking down at Daniel with cool appraisal. Mr. Harper, I presume. That's right, and you're trespassing. Am I? Rourke smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. I was under the impression that when someone steals your property, you're entitled to retrieve it. I didn't steal anything. I freed a child from being sold like livestock. A child under my legal guardianship. I have papers, Mr. Harper, signed by a territorial judge. That makes young Jonah Blake my ward, and you a kidnapper. The law's wrong. The law, Rourke said, is whatever men with power say it is, and right now I'm saying my ward needs to come home. He's not going anywhere. Rourke sighed like Daniel was being tedious. Mr. Harper, I appreciate your sentiment, truly I do. But you're a rancher. You understand property rights. The boy belongs to me. Children aren't property. Now in this case, the law disagrees. Rourke gestured to Reeves. Jack, would you kindly collect our runaway? Reeves dismounted, grinning that yellow grin. Daniel stepped forward, blocking his path. Touch that boy and we'll have a problem. We already have a problem, Rourke said. You've interfered with my business, Mr. Harper, stolen my property, poisoned him against returning to his duties. That's 3 problems, actually. My heart breaks. Rourke's smile vanished. I'm trying to be reasonable here. Give me the boy, and we'll call this a misunderstanding. Refuse, and I'll have the sheriff arrest you for kidnapping. Ben Hastings knows exactly what you're doing, Daniel said. He won't help you. Won't he? Even when presented with a legal guardianship order and a signed complaint, Sheriff Hastings is many things, but he's not stupid. He knows which battles he can win. Rourke leaned forward in his saddle. You can't protect the boy, Mr. Harper. You're one man with one gun on a small ranch in the middle of nowhere. I have lawyers, resources, and the law on my side. This ends one way. Then I guess we'll see. For a moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the grass and the creak of saddle leather. Then the front door of the house opened, and Jonah stepped out. No! Daniel shouted, but the boy kept walking. He moved slowly across the yard, thin and small in borrowed clothes, until he stood beside Daniel. I'll go, Jonah said quietly. Just don't hurt him, or Lily, please. Jonah, get back inside, Daniel ordered. It's okay, the boy said, and there was something ancient and resigned in his voice. I knew this would happen. I knew he'd come. Smart boy, Rourke said. Come along now. We have work waiting. Jonah started forward, and Daniel's hand shot out, gripping his shoulder. No. Mr. Harper, Rourke said with exaggerated patience, you're making this difficult. Good. Rourke's face hardened. Reeves, take the boy. If Mr. Harper interferes, deal with him appropriately. Reeves advanced, and Daniel pushed Jonah behind him, his hand moving toward the rifle he'd propped against the barn wall. I wouldn't, one of Rourke's other men said, leveling a pistol. They were at an impasse. 5 armed men against 1. The odds were impossible. Then more hoofbeats sounded. Tom Bradley rode into the yard, followed by Doc Morrison in his buggy, and behind them, miracle of miracles, Sheriff Ben Hastings with 3 deputies. Rourke's expression flickered with annoyance. Sheriff, what impeccable timing. Mr. Rourke, Hastings said evenly, heard you were riding out this way. Thought I'd come along, make sure everything stays civilized. How thoughtful. I'm simply retrieving my ward. Mr. Harper has been keeping him unlawfully. That's so. Hastings looked at Daniel. This true? The boy's under my protection. Against his legal guardian's wishes. Against a man who's been using children as slave labor. Rourke's eyes narrowed. That's slander, Sheriff. I run a legitimate vocational training program. Then you won't mind if I come inspect it, Hastings said. Make sure everything's above board. I most certainly would mind. My operation is private property. With 40-some children working it. Children who, according to my records, should be in school or apprenticed to legitimate tradesmen, not hauling ore 12 hours a day. Your records are incomplete. Then help me complete them. Let me visit your mine. The 2 men stared at each other, and Daniel could feel the tension crackling like summer lightning. Finally, Rourke straightened in his saddle. This isn't over, Sheriff. I have legal standing, and I will pursue it. You do that. Until a court orders otherwise, the boy stays with Mr. Harper. We'll see what Judge Merrick has to say. I look forward to asking him some questions myself, Hastings replied. Rourke's jaw tightened. He looked at Jonah, really looked at him, and something ugly moved behind his eyes. You're making a mistake, boy. Running won't save your brother. It'll just make things worse for him. Jonah went white. Are we done here? Hastings asked pointedly. Rourke gathered his reins. For now. He turned his horse. But Mr. Harper, you should ask yourself what you're willing to sacrifice for someone else's child. Because I promise you, before this is finished, you'll lose more than you can afford. The 5 riders wheeled and departed, leaving dust and the smell of threat hanging in the air. When they were gone, Daniel's legs nearly gave out. He sat down hard on the porch steps, his hands shaking with adrenaline. Jonah stood frozen in the yard, tears streaming down his face. He's going to hurt Ethan, because of me. He's going to punish him. Lily ran out and threw her arms around him. No, he won't. We won't let him. We can't stop him, Jonah sobbed. I told you, nobody can. But Sheriff Hastings knelt in front of the boy, his weathered face serious. Listen to me, son. I know you're scared. I know Rourke seems invincible, but he's just a man, and men can be stopped. How? By people who refuse to look away. But Daniel stood, his fear hardening into something like resolve. How soon can we move on that mine? Hastings met his eyes. 2 days? Maybe 3. I need to coordinate with the Territorial Marshal's office. Make this official. Make it 2, Daniel said, before Rourke decides the risk is worth it and comes back with more men. Daniel. 2 days, Ben. That boy's brother is up in those mountains. Every day we wait is another day those kids suffer. Hastings nodded slowly. 2 days. But we do this right. Legal. No mistakes. That night, Jonah's nightmares were worse than ever. Daniel sat with him until dawn, holding his hand while the boy cried out names in his sleep and fought invisible enemies. When the sun finally rose, Jonah opened his eyes and looked at Daniel with exhausted clarity. I'll help you, he said. Whatever you need to know about the mine, I'll tell you. Just please save them. Save Ethan. We will, Daniel promised. I swear it. And in that moment, sitting in the gray dawn light with a broken boy clutching his hand, Daniel understood that there was no turning back. Whatever came next, whatever it cost, they were committed now. The summer heat pressed close. Outside, the chickens began their morning chatter. Lily's footsteps sounded in the hallway. Life continued, ordinary and impossible. But in 2 days, Daniel would ride into the mountains with armed men to face someone who thought he owned children like livestock. In 2 days, everything would change. The question was whether they'd all survive it. 2 days turned into a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Daniel spent the first morning checking his rifle, cleaning it with the methodical care of a man who understood that details could mean the difference between life and death. The Winchester felt heavy in his hands, heavier than it had since the war, and he tried not to think about what it meant that he was preparing for violence again after so many years of peace. Tom Bradley arrived at midday with maps spread across his cousin's descriptions of the terrain. They laid everything out on the kitchen table while Lily kept Jonah occupied in the barn, showing him how to curry the horses. The boy needed distraction, needed something to do with his hands that wasn't dwelling on what was coming. Black Creek Valley sits here, Tom said, pointing to a spot where the mountains folded into themselves like a secret. 3 days hard ride, maybe 2.5 if we push. The mine entrance is on the north face, hidden by timber. There's a creek running through, that's how the valley got its name, and the camp sits beside it. Sheriff Hastings studied the map with narrowed eyes. How many buildings? According to my cousin's source, there's a main barracks, a cookhouse, the mine office, and a separate building where the guards sleep. Maybe 30, 40 men total working for Rourke. Against how many of us? I've got 5 deputies I trust completely, men who won't be bought or scared off. Hastings looked at Daniel. The Territorial Marshal's sending 3 more. That makes 9 lawmen, plus you and Tom if you're both still set on coming. We're coming, Daniel said flatly. 11 against 40. Tom whistled low. Not great odds. We're not going to war, Hastings reminded them. We're serving a legal inspection order. If Rourke's operation is legitimate like he claims, he'll let us look around. If it's not, then we make arrests and get those children out, Daniel finished. Doc Morrison had been quiet, listening. Now he spoke up. I'm coming too. You'll need medical help if things go wrong. and someone to examine the children, document their conditions for evidence. Doc, this could get dangerous, Hastings warned. All the more reason you need a physician along. Pastor Williams, who'd appeared an hour earlier with sandwiches and coffee from his wife, nodded his agreement. I'd like to come as well. Those children will need spiritual comfort. No offense, Pastor, Hastings interrupted, but I need fighting men, not clergy. Then consider me a witness, Williams said firmly. Someone outside law enforcement to testify to what we find. The more credible witnesses, the stronger our case in court. Hastings considered, then nodded. All right, but you follow orders, and if shooting starts, you stay down. They worked through the afternoon planning routes and contingencies, discussing what they'd do if Rourke refused entry, if violence erupted, if the children panicked or the guards fought back. Each scenario felt more dangerous than the last. As evening settled across the ranch, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow, Daniel found Jonah sitting on the porch steps again, that spot that seemed to draw him when his thoughts grew too heavy. You doing all right? Daniel asked, settling beside him. Jonah didn't answer right away. He was holding something, the small wooden horse Lily had given him yesterday, carved by Daniel during a long winter evening years ago when his hands needed something to do and his heart needed distraction from missing Margaret. Ethan made me one like this, Jonah said finally, his thumb tracing the horse's mane. Before everything. When we were still at the orphanage and things weren't so bad. He found a piece of wood in the yard and borrowed a knife from the cook. Spent 3 weeks carving it during free time. You still have it? No, they took it when we got to the mine. Rourke said we couldn't have personal belongings, said it made us soft. Jonah's voice went tight. Ethan tried to hide it, but they searched us, found it in his sock, guard threw it in the fire right in front of us. Daniel's jaw clenched. I'm sorry. Ethan didn't cry, didn't make a sound, just watched it burn. Jonah looked at Daniel, his eyes older than they should ever be. That's when I knew we weren't going to leave. That this was our life now. It's not your life anymore. Maybe not mine, but Ethan's still there. All of them are. He paused. What if you can't get them out? What if Rourke's guards fight back and people die? What if it's all for nothing? Then at least we tried. At least we didn't look away. My mama used to say that trying doesn't count if you fail. Your mama was wrong about that, Daniel said gently. Trying always counts. It's the only thing that does. Jonah was quiet for a long moment, turning the wooden horse over in his hands. Will you do something for me? If I can. If you find Ethan, when you find him, will you give him this? He held out the horse. So he knows I'm okay, that I didn't forget him. Daniel's throat went tight. You give it to him yourself when we bring him home. But if something goes wrong, nothing's going wrong. You can't promise that. No, Daniel admitted. I can't, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to bring your brother back safely. Jonah looked at him for a long moment, then carefully placed the wooden horse in Daniel's hand. Just in case. Daniel closed his fingers around it, feeling the smoothness of the carved wood, the weight of what it represented. Just in case, he echoed. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him and thinking about everything that could go wrong. What if Rourke had been warned and moved the children? What if there was an ambush? What if he got himself killed and left Lily an orphan? What if? Around midnight, he gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen. He was surprised to find lamplight already burning, and Jonah sitting at the table, drawing something on a piece of paper with one of Lily's pencils. Can't sleep either? Daniel asked. Jonah shook his head. Kept seeing Ethan's face, wondering if he's scared, if he knows I'm trying to help. Daniel poured himself coffee from the pot that was probably 6 hours old and sat down across from the boy. What are you drawing? Map of the mine and the camp. I want to make sure you know where everything is. He pushed the paper across the table. The drawing was crude but detailed. Rectangles for buildings, lines for tunnels, X marks for guard posts. Jonah had labeled everything in careful letters. Barracks, cookhouse, office, main shaft, east tunnel, west tunnel. This is good work, Daniel said, studying it. The office is here, Jonah pointed. That's where Rourke keeps the ledger. There's a safe behind his desk. That's where the important papers are. The guardianship documents, the contracts, all of it. You've seen inside the office? Once. Rourke called Ethan in to discipline him. Jonah's voice wavered. I waited outside. The door was open a crack. I could see the desk, the safe. What happened? To Ethan, I mean. Jonah's hands clenched. He'd been caught giving his food to the little ones. Some of the younger kids couldn't keep up with the work quotas, so they'd get reduced rations as punishment. Ethan would skip meals to feed them. Rourke found out. Daniel didn't ask what the punishment had been. He could see it in the way Jonah's hands shook, in the tears that suddenly spilled down his cheeks. He's brave, Jonah whispered. Braver than anyone I've ever known. He'd stand up to the guards when they were being cruel, take beatings meant for smaller kids, organize the others so the work got done faster and nobody fell behind. He looked at Daniel desperately. You have to save him, please. He can't die there. He can't. We're going to bring him home, Daniel said with all the certainty he could muster. Him and all the others. You keep saying that, but how do you know? Because the alternative is unacceptable. Jonah wiped his eyes. Is that what you told yourself when Miss Lily's mama died? That it was unacceptable? The words landed like a punch. Daniel sat back, startled by the boy's perception. I'm sorry, Jonah said quickly. I shouldn't have... No, it's all right. Daniel took a breath. You're right. When Margaret got sick, I told myself she'd get better because the alternative was unacceptable. And then she died anyway, and I learned that sometimes unacceptable things happen regardless of what we want. Then why say it now? Because this is different. Margaret's death was disease, something beyond my control. But those children in that mine, that's something we can change. That's something worth fighting for, even if it's dangerous. Jonah studied him in the lamplight. You're a good man, Mr. Harper. I'm just a man, trying to do the right thing. That's what makes you good. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The only sound, the ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant call of an owl outside. Finally, Jonah spoke again. There's something else you should know. About the mine. What is it? Some of the tunnels aren't safe. There have been cave-ins. 3 kids died last winter when a support beam gave way. Rourke didn't even stop work to dig them out properly, just sealed that tunnel and opened a new one. Daniel felt sick. Did you know the children who died? One of them was a girl named Sarah. She was 8, used to sing while she worked. Old songs her mother taught her. Her voice was the only pretty thing in that whole dark place. Jonah's voice cracked. After the cave-in, everything got quieter, like the mine swallowed up not just Sarah, but all the music she might have made. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, just remember. When you're in there, watch for weak timber. Look for cracks in the stone. The mine wants to kill us just as much as Rourke does. The next morning came too quickly. Daniel woke before dawn to find his house already stirring with activity. Sheriff Hastings had arrived with his deputies, hard-looking men who checked their weapons with professional efficiency. Tom Bradley was saddling horses in the yard. Doc Morrison loaded medical supplies into saddlebags while Pastor Williams looked vaguely nervous but determined. Lily clung to Daniel's waist while he prepared to leave. You're coming back, right? Of course I am. Promise? He knelt down, looking her in the eyes. I promise to do everything I can to come back to you. Can you be brave while I'm gone? Will you bring Jonah's brother? That's the plan. Good. Jonah needs him. He cries at night when he thinks nobody can hear. Daniel's heart twisted. Sarah Chen is going to stay here with you both while we're gone. You mind her, understand? I will. Lily hugged him fiercely. Daddy, be careful. Always. Sarah Chen arrived as the sun was rising, a practical woman in her 50s who ran the general store with efficient kindness. She hugged Daniel and told him not to worry. She'd watch the children like they were her own. Jonah appeared on the porch, pale and silent. Daniel walked over to him. This is it, the boy said. This is it. You have the map? Daniel patted his coat pocket where the drawing was carefully folded. Right here. Jonah looked at the assembled men, 11 riders preparing to head into the mountains. It's not enough. Rourke has so many more. We're not planning to fight. We're planning to enforce the law. And if the law isn't enough, then we'll deal with that when we come to it. Jonah reached into his pocket and pulled out something Daniel had seen before, the peppermint candy wrapper from that first day in the market. He'd kept it, folded carefully, carried like a talisman. Miss Lily gave me kindness when nobody else would, he said quietly. And you gave me safety. Whatever happens up there, I want you to know. I want you to know it mattered. You mattered. Daniel pulled the boy into a hug, feeling how thin he still was, how fragile. We're bringing your brother home, believe that. I'm trying to. That's all any of us can do. The riders assembled. 11 men on horseback, carrying rifles and determination and the weight of what they were about to attempt. The summer sun was already hot, promising another scorching day. Sheriff Hastings took the lead, his badge catching the light. Let's ride. They left Silver Ridge behind, following the road north into foothills that gradually steepened into mountains. The terrain changed as they climbed, dry grassland giving way to pine forest, the air growing thinner and cooler. They pushed hard, stopping only to water the horses and eat quick meals of jerky and hard biscuit. By nightfall of the first day, they'd covered 40 miles. They made camp in a clearing beside a creek, posting watches and shifts, speaking in low voices about what tomorrow might bring. Daniel sat apart from the others, staring into the fire and thinking about Jonah's map, about Ethan somewhere in the darkness ahead, about 40-some children breathing dust and waiting for salvation that might never come. Tom Bradley joined him, handing over a tin cup of coffee. You're quiet. Thinking. About? Whether we're doing the right thing, whether we're prepared for how bad it might be. Tom sipped his coffee. I've been thinking about that too. But then I remember that boy's face when Rourke rode up to your ranch, the pure terror in his eyes. And I think, even if this goes sideways, even if it costs us, at least we tried. Trying doesn't feel like enough. It's all we've got. They rode at dawn, climbing higher into mountains that seemed to fold endlessly into themselves. The trail grew narrower, more treacherous. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses over rocky sections too dangerous to ride. By late afternoon of the second day, they reached the ridge overlooking Black Creek Valley. Daniel pulled his horse to a stop, staring down at what lay below. The valley was exactly as Jonah had described, a hidden pocket in the mountains, accessible only by a narrow trail. A creek ran through it, glittering in the sunlight, and beside the creek sat the camp. From this distance, it looked almost peaceful. Buildings arranged in a rough square, smoke rising from the cookhouse, horses in a corral, men moving about their business. Then Daniel saw the children. Even from here, he could make them out, small figures moving between the mine entrance and the ore carts, hauling loads that looked too heavy for their size. They moved in a shuffling line, heads down, beaten into efficiency through repetition and fear. Sweet mercy, Doc Morrison breathed. Pastor Williams had gone pale. There are so many of them. Sheriff Hastings pulled out a spyglass and studied the camp. I count maybe 15 guards visible, probably more inside, and he paused, adjusting the glass. And children everywhere, working the carts, sorting ore, carrying water. Some of them can't be more than 6 or 7 years old. He passed the spyglass to Daniel. Through the lens, the scene became horrifyingly clear. Barefoot children in ragged clothes, guards with rifles watching over them. The dark mouth of the mine entrance swallowing a line of small workers heading down for the next shift. Daniel searched the faces visible through the glass, looking for a boy who might be Ethan. But they were too far away, the features indistinct. We go in at dawn, Hastings said. While they're changing shifts, that's when they'll be most confused, least organized. Why wait? One of the deputies asked. We've got right on our side. Because we do this smart, Hastings said firmly. We ride in there now. In broad daylight, Rourke will have time to prepare. But at dawn, when half his men are asleep and the other half are just waking, that's when we have the advantage. They made camp on the ridge out of sight of the valley below. No fire. Hastings didn't want smoke giving away their position. They ate cold rations and spoke in whispers, and as darkness fell, they took turns watching the camp below through the spyglass. Daniel took the midnight watch. He lay on his belly at the ridge edge, glass pressed to his eye, watching the valley sleep. Guards walked perimeters. Lamplight showed in the barracks. The mine entrance gaped like a wound. Then, around 2 in the morning, something changed. The barracks door opened. A single small figure emerged, a child, moving quickly and quietly toward the tree line, running. Daniel's heart jumped. He watched as the child made it perhaps 50 yards before a guard spotted the movement. Shouts erupted. More guards poured out. They caught the child easily, dragging the small figure back toward the camp. Even at this distance, Daniel could hear the screaming. They brought the child into the open area between the buildings. Guards gathered. And then, illuminated by lamplight, Daniel watched as they beat the child for trying to escape. He wanted to look away. Couldn't. The violence was methodical, purposeful, a lesson being taught to anyone watching. When it was over, they dragged the limp figure back to the barracks. Daniel lowered the spyglass with shaking hands. "What happened?" Tom whispered, appearing beside him. "A runner. They caught them. Beat them." Daniel's voice came out hollow. "We have to get those kids out of there." "Few more hours. Dawn's coming." But the hours dragged like years. Daniel couldn't unsee what he'd witnessed. Couldn't stop imagining Jonah enduring the same treatment, or Ethan, or any of the others. When the sky finally began to lighten in the east, painting the mountains in shades of gray and gold, Hastings roused the camp. "Check your weapons. Make sure you're loaded. We ride in under a legal inspection order, but if shooting starts, you defend yourselves and those children. Understood?" Nods all around, grim faces, men preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. They mounted up and started down the trail into Black Creek Valley. The descent felt endless, each switchback bringing them closer to a confrontation that could end in blood. As they reached the valley floor, the camp came fully into view, larger than it had seemed from above. More buildings, more guards, more children beginning to emerge for the morning shift change. A guard near the corral spotted them. He shouted in alarm. Within seconds, men were pouring out of the guards' quarters, rifles in hand. Hastings raised his hand, stopping the group. "I'm Sheriff Ben Hastings, representing Silver Ridge and the Montana Territorial Government. I have a legal order to inspect this operation." A man stepped forward. Not Jack Reeves, but someone equally hard-looking. "Mr. Rourke ain't here, and we don't allow visitors." "I'm not asking permission. I'm executing a legal order." Hastings nudged his horse forward. "Stand aside." "The hell I will." Hastings pulled his rifle from its scabbard. Behind him, his deputies did the same. "I said stand aside." For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. The guards had their weapons. The lawmen had theirs. Children had stopped working, staring at this confrontation with wide, frightened eyes. Then a voice cut through the tension. "Let them through, Collins." Daniel's blood chilled. He recognized that voice. Victor Rourke emerged from the mine office, looking as composed as he had at the ranch, despite the early hour and the remote location. He was dressed for business even here, vest and coat, polished boots. "Sheriff Hastings," he said pleasantly, "what an unexpected visit, and you brought friends. We're here to inspect your operation." "So I heard. Do you have a warrant?" Hastings pulled a paper from his coat. "Signed by the territorial judge 3 days ago." "Not Judge Merrick, I trust." "Judge Carson, actually. Seems Judge Merrick has developed some conflicts of interest regarding your operation." Rourke's smile thinned. "I see. Well then, by all means. Inspect to your heart's content. You'll find everything in order." He stepped aside with a grand gesture, but Daniel could see the calculation in his eyes, the wheels turning as he figured out how to control this situation. The riders moved forward into the camp. Up close, it was even worse than Daniel had imagined. The children looked hollow-eyed and exhausted. Their clothes were rags. Many were barefoot despite the rocky ground. The smell of unwashed bodies and desperation hung heavy in the morning air. Doc Morrison dismounted immediately, moving toward a group of younger children. "I need to examine them." "Be my guest," Rourke said, "though I assure you they're all healthy and well cared for." Daniel scanned the faces desperately, looking for Ethan, looking for any sign of the boy who'd sacrificed himself so his brother could escape. Then he saw him, a boy standing near the mine entrance, maybe 14, thin but not broken. He had Jonah's eyes, that same dark color, the same shape. But where Jonah's eyes were ancient with fear, this boy's eyes burned with defiance. Their gazes met across the camp. The boy's expression shifted, confusion, then recognition. He'd seen the wooden horse Daniel was holding, pulled from his pocket without conscious thought. Ethan took a step forward. "Where did you get that?" Daniel dismounted, moving toward him. Guards shifted nervously, but Rourke waved them back. "Your brother gave it to me," Daniel said quietly. "Jonah. He's safe." The change that came over Ethan was instant and overwhelming. His defiance cracked, revealing desperate hope underneath. "Jonah's alive? You're sure?" "I'm sure. He's at my ranch with my daughter. He's eating regular meals and sleeping in a real bed, and he's safe." Ethan's knees buckled. He sat down hard on the ground, shaking. "I thought they'd killed him. When Reeves came back without him, I thought, he's alive, and he sent me to find you." Other children were gathering now, drawn by this impossible conversation. A girl who couldn't have been more than 7 tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Are you here to take us home?" The question broke something in Daniel's chest. "Yes, all of you." "The hell you are," Rourke said, his pleasant mask finally slipping. "These children are under my legal guardianship. You have no authority to remove them." Sheriff Hastings stepped forward, his hand on his pistol. "Actually, I do. That inspection warrant includes authorization to remove any children found in unsafe or abusive conditions." "Abuse? That's a strong accusation, Sheriff." "Then explain the beatings, the malnutrition, the children working 12-hour shifts in dangerous mines." "Discipline and hard work build character. These children came to me as delinquents and orphans. I'm giving them skills and purpose." "You're enslaving them," Daniel said flatly. Rourke's eyes narrowed. "You're out of your depth, rancher. This is a legal operation, sanctioned by territorial authorities. You can't just walk in here and steal my workers." "Watch us," Hastings said. He turned to his deputies. "Round up the children, all of them. Get them ready to move." The guards raised their weapons. 20 men with rifles surrounding the 11 riders and 40-some children. "I don't think so," Rourke said softly. The standoff hung there, balanced on a knife's edge. Then Ethan stood up, his voice ringing clear across the camp. "Everyone grab your things. We're leaving." The children moved, not all at once, but in a growing wave. They'd been waiting for this moment, hoping for it, and now that it was here, they weren't going to let it slip away. "Stop," Rourke commanded. "All of you, back to work. Now." But they didn't stop. Children ran to the barracks, grabbing whatever meager possessions they had. The younger ones clung to the older ones. Ethan organized them with practiced efficiency, the voice of someone who'd been leading long before adults arrived to help. "Collins," Rourke said, his voice dangerous. "Stop them." The guard captain hesitated, looking at the children, at the armed lawmen, at his employer's face. "Do it," Rourke hissed. Collins raised his rifle. "Everyone stay where you are, or—" The shot came from somewhere in the trees, a crack of rifle fire that split the morning silence. Collins jerked and fell, a red bloom spreading across his shoulder. Chaos erupted. Guards scattered for cover, returning fire toward the trees. The lawmen dove from their horses, pulling children down with them. More shots rang out, impossible to tell who was shooting at whom. Daniel grabbed the nearest children, 3 small girls, and dragged them behind a wagon. Bullets punched through wood. Someone screamed, horses bolted in panic. Through the confusion, Daniel saw Rourke running for the mine office, saw him disappear inside. The ledger. If Rourke got to the safe, destroyed the evidence, they'd have nothing to prove what had happened here. Nothing to keep him from doing this somewhere else. Daniel ran. He crossed the open ground at a dead sprint, bullets kicking up dirt around his boots, his heart hammering against his ribs. Behind him the gunfight raged, lawmen and guards exchanging fire, while children screamed and scattered for cover. But all Daniel could think about was that ledger, that proof, that one piece of evidence that could end this forever. The office door hung open where Rourke had disappeared through it. Daniel hit the threshold hard, rifle up, and found Rourke already at the safe behind his desk, spinning the combination lock with practiced speed. "Don't," Daniel said, leveling the Winchester at the man's back. Rourke didn't turn, didn't stop. The lock clicked open. "You're too late, Harper. Even if you kill me, you'll never prove what happened here. These children will be branded liars and runaways, and everything goes back to how it was." "Not if I have that ledger." "Then you'll have to shoot me for it." Rourke pulled open the safe door, reaching inside. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger, but he couldn't do it, couldn't shoot a man in the back, even one who deserved it. That hesitation cost him. Rourke spun with a pistol in his hand and fired. The bullet went wide, smashing into the wall behind Daniel's head. Daniel dove sideways as Rourke fired again, the shot punching through the desk where Daniel had been standing a second before. Daniel came up shooting. His first shot caught Rourke in the shoulder, spinning him around. The pistol clattered from his hand. Rourke fell against the desk, blood spreading across his expensive vest. His face twisted with pain and rage. "You fool!" he gasped. "You have no idea what you've done. I have lawyers, judges, politicians. They'll crucify you for this." "Maybe," Daniel said, keeping his rifle trained on the man. "But those children are still leaving." He moved to the safe, rifle barrel never wavering from Rourke. Inside sat a thick leather-bound ledger along with stacks of papers, contracts, guardianship documents, correspondence. Daniel grabbed it all, shoving the ledger under his arm. Outside, the gunfire was tapering off. Shouts echoed across the camp. Daniel needed to get back out there, needed to make sure the children were safe. "You think you're a hero," Rourke said, slumped against the desk and clutching his bleeding shoulder. "But you're just another fool who doesn't understand how the world works. Power doesn't answer to morality. It answers to money and influence, and I have both." "You had both," Daniel corrected. He backed toward the door. "Now you just have a bullet wound and a prison cell waiting." He stepped outside into chaos that was beginning to resolve itself. The shooting had stopped. Half a dozen guards lay wounded or surrendering. The rest had fled into the trees. Sheriff Hastings and his deputies were rounding up prisoners while Tom Bradley and Pastor Williams herded frightened children into a protective cluster. Doc Morrison worked frantically on a fallen deputy, one of the territorial marshal's men, bleeding from a leg wound. The doctor's hands moved with quick efficiency, applying pressure, calling for bandages. Ethan appeared at Daniel's elbow, his face smudged with dirt and smoke. "Where's the ledger?" Daniel held it up. "Got it." Relief flooded the boy's face. "Then it's over. We can prove everything." "Not quite over yet." Daniel looked around the camp, taking stock. "How many children total?" 41. "Some are down in the mine still. They were on the night shift." Ethan's voice went urgent. "We need to get them out before the guards regroup or the tunnels collapse from all this shooting." "Show me." Ethan led him toward the mine entrance, a dark mouth cut into the mountainside and reinforced with rough timber. The smell that rolled out was thick with dust and damp stone and human misery. "The main shaft goes down about 50 feet, Ethan explained as they descended into darkness. Daniel had grabbed a lantern from outside, its flickering light throwing wild shadows on the tunnel walls. Then it splits into 3 branches. East Tunnel's unstable. That's where the cave-in happened last winter. West Tunnel is where most of the ore is. Middle Tunnel is newer, but the support beams are questionable. The temperature dropped as they went deeper. Daniel could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness, and voices. Children's voices, frightened and confused by the sound of gunfire above. They emerged into a wider chamber where perhaps a dozen children clustered around a single lamp. They were filthy, exhausted, some barely able to stand. When they saw Ethan, relief washed across their faces. "It's okay," Ethan called out. "The sheriff's here. We're getting out." "All of us?" a small boy asked, his voice barely audible. "All of us." The children moved forward, stumbling in their eagerness. Daniel counted them, 12 total, ages ranging from maybe 7 to 13. They looked like ghosts, pale from lack of sunlight, coughing from the dust that filled their lungs with every breath. "Can everyone walk?" Daniel asked. Most nodded. But one girl, couldn't be more than 8, sat against the wall, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle. "That's Mara," Ethan said quietly. "Orcart ran over her foot 3 days ago. Rourke wouldn't let Doc Morrison down here to set it. Said she'd heal or she wouldn't, but work didn't stop for injuries." Daniel's jaw clenched. He knelt beside the girl. "Hi there. I'm Daniel. I'm going to carry you out of here, all right?" Mara looked at him with eyes too old for her face. "Are you really taking us away?" "I really am." "Forever?" "Forever." She started crying then, silent tears that tracked through the grime on her cheeks. Daniel picked her up as gently as he could. She weighed almost nothing, all bones and fear. "Lead the way," he told Ethan. They made their way back through the tunnels, the other children following like a ragged line of refugees. Halfway up the main shaft, a rumble shook the walls. Dust rained down from the ceiling. One of the support beams groaned ominously. "Move," Ethan commanded. "Now!" This whole section's been unstable since they blasted too close to the surface last month. They ran. Daniel held Mara tight against his chest while she buried her face in his shoulder. The rumbling grew louder. Behind them, something gave way with a crack like thunder. The tunnel was collapsing. They burst out into daylight just as a section of the mine entrance caved in, sending up a plume of dust and debris. Daniel kept running until they were clear, then set Mara down gently and turned to count heads. All 12 children accounted for. Nobody left behind. "That was close," Ethan breathed. "Too close." Daniel looked back at the partially collapsed entrance. "Anyone else still down there?" "No, everyone's out." Sheriff Hastings approached, his face grim. "Rourke?" "In his office, shot in the shoulder. He'll live." "Good. I want him alive for trial." Hastings surveyed the camp. "We've got 6 guards in custody, 3 wounded, and the rest scattered to the wind. How many children?" 41 total, Ethan reported. "Some injured, all malnourished, most with respiratory problems from the mine dust." Doc Morrison was already moving among them, doing quick triage. "This one needs immediate attention," he called out, kneeling beside Mara. "Infection set in. If we don't get her to a proper hospital soon, we could lose the leg." "Can she travel?" "She'll have to. We can't stay here." Pastor Williams appeared with canteens of water, distributing them to the children. Many drank too fast, desperate, then vomited the water back up. Their bodies had forgotten how to process basic necessities. Tom Bradley was organizing supplies, what little food was in the cookhouse, blankets from the barracks, anything that might help on the journey back. "We're going to need wagons. These kids can't walk 3 days back to Silver Ridge." "There's wagons in the barn," Ethan said. "Rourke used them for hauling ore." "Get them ready. Load the youngest and most injured first." As the adults organized the exodus, Daniel found himself standing with Ethan, watching the children emerge from their shock into something like hope. "How did you keep them together?" Daniel asked. "All this time. How did you keep them from giving up?" Ethan's expression was distant. "I told them stories. Every night in the barracks, after lights out, I'd tell stories about the world outside. Made-up adventures where we escaped and went on to have normal lives. Some of the kids stopped believing, but most hung on to it. That idea that someday, somehow, we'd get out. And now you are. Because Jonah made it. Because he found you." Ethan's voice cracked. "Is he really okay? Really safe?" "He has nightmares. He's still scared. But he's healing." Daniel pulled the wooden horse from his pocket. "He wanted you to have this, so you'd know he didn't forget you." Ethan took the small carving with shaking hands. He turned it over, examining it, and something in his face just broke. He clutched it to his chest and wept, great shuddering sobs that seemed to carry 2 years of held-back grief. Daniel put a hand on his shoulder and let him cry. By midday, they had the children loaded into 3 wagons and the camp secured as best they could manage. Rourke had been bandaged and bound, placed under guard in one of the wagons. The captured guards were shackled together and made to walk. Evidence was collected: the ledger, documents from the safe, samples of the children's work tools, photographs that Doc Morrison insisted on taking with his camera to document conditions. The procession that left Black Creek Valley looked like something from a war. Wounded men, traumatized children, adults grim-faced with the weight of what they'd seen. The wagons creaked under their loads. Dust rose in their wake. They made camp that first night in a meadow 10 miles from the valley. The children huddled together for warmth and comfort, unused to the open sky, frightened by the space and freedom. Many couldn't sleep without the familiar sounds of the mine or the barracks. Ethan moved among them, offering reassurance, distributing the meager food supplies, checking on the younger ones. Daniel watched him work and understood why Jonah had been so desperate to save his brother. Ethan was a natural leader, someone who'd been forged in darkness into something unexpectedly strong. Around the campfire, Sheriff Hastings reviewed the ledger by lamplight, his face growing darker with each page. 43 names, like I thought, he said, but only 41 children rescued. That means 2 are unaccounted for. Dead, Ethan said flatly, appearing out of the darkness. Sarah Chen and Marcus Williams. Sarah died in the cave-in. Marcus was beaten for trying to escape, died of his injuries. Hastings made notes. We'll need formal statements from witnesses, multiple children confirming the same events. You'll have them. Everyone saw what happened to Marcus. In the cave-in, there are 15 kids who were there when it happened. What about the guards who participated in the beatings? Collins was the worst, but he's wounded, under arrest. The others, Ethan's jaw tightened. Most of them just followed orders, didn't question it, told themselves they were just doing a job. Evil doesn't always look like evil, Pastor Williams said quietly. Sometimes it looks like ordinary men collecting a paycheck. They pushed hard the next day, trying to cover as much ground as possible before exhaustion made them stop. But the children slowed them down. Frequent stops for rest, for the injured who couldn't handle the wagon's jostling, for the ones who panicked in the open spaces, or the ones who broke down crying for reasons they couldn't articulate. Doc Morrison worked tirelessly, treating infections, setting broken bones that had healed wrong, dosing out what little medicine he had for fevers and lung ailments. Mara's leg worried him most. Infection's spreading, he told Daniel privately. If we don't get her to a real hospital with proper equipment, I may have to amputate in the field. How long do we have? A day. Maybe 2. Then we push through the night if we have to. They did push through, rotating drivers on the wagons, letting the children sleep while the adults drove through darkness. The moon rose full and bright, lighting their way down mountain trails that were treacherous even in daylight. Daniel drove one wagon with Ethan beside him, the boy refusing to rest while others worked. Tell me about Jonah, Ethan said as they navigated a switchback. What's he like now? Scared, brave, smart. He draws maps and tells stories and worries about you constantly. Daniel paused. He's attached himself to my daughter Lily. She's 7, talks enough for 3 people, and decided the moment she met him that he was worth saving. What's she like? Fierce, stubborn, got her mother's heart and her mother's strength. Saying it out loud made Daniel's chest tight. Margaret would have liked Jonah. Would have liked you too. Jonah mentioned your wife died. 2 years ago, fever took her in 3 days. Barely had time to say goodbye. I'm sorry. Me too. Daniel guided the horses around a fallen log. But I'm learning that sometimes the people we lose leave us tools for survival. Margaret taught me and Lily to be brave, to stand up when others sit down. That's what I was doing in that market square, what she would have done. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then, my mama used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when everyone's watching. It's what they do when nobody would know. You could have walked past Jonah that day. Nobody would have blamed you. I would have known. Exactly. They reached Silver Ridge late on the 3rd day, riding into town just as the sun was setting. Word had spread somehow. Maybe Tom Bradley's wife had sent messages. Maybe Sarah Chen had talked. Whatever the reason, half the town was waiting in the street. Daniel saw Jonah first. The boy stood on the steps of the general store, holding Lily's hand, scanning every face with desperate hope. When his eyes found Ethan in the wagon, he froze. Just stopped moving entirely, like his heart had forgotten how to beat. Then he ran. Ethan jumped from the wagon before it had fully stopped, stumbling as his legs nearly gave out. The brothers collided in the middle of the street, grabbing onto each other like drowning men finding purchase, and the sound Jonah made was something between a laugh and a sob. You're alive, Jonah kept saying. You're alive, you're alive, you're alive. Because of you, Ethan managed. Because you were brave enough to run. They held on like they'd never let go. And around them the town watched in silence. Some people were crying. Others looked away, unable to bear the raw emotion on display. Lily tugged on Daniel's sleeve when he climbed down from the wagon. You brought him home. I promised, didn't I? You did. She hugged him fiercely, then pulled back to study his face. You look tired, Daddy. I am tired, sweetheart, but we're home now. Doc Morrison was already shouting orders, getting the injured children into his office, calling for assistance. The town mobilized instantly. Women bringing food, men offering homes for the night, Pastor Williams opening the church to house the overflow. Sarah Chen appeared, taking charge of Lily and Jonah and Ethan. "Come on, you three. Let's get you all fed and settled while the adults handle this mess." But Jonah wouldn't let go of Ethan's hand. "He stays with me. Wherever I go, he comes too." "Then he comes too," Sarah agreed gently. Sheriff Hastings had Rourke transferred directly to the town jail, along with the captured guards. The man was white-faced from blood loss and pain, but his eyes burned with hatred as he was led past Daniel. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I'll see you hang for this." "You're welcome to try," Hastings said. "Now shut up and walk." The evening dissolved into organized chaos. Children were sorted and settled. Statements were taken. Doc Morrison worked until midnight in his office, while other town doctors came to help. Mara's leg was saved, but just barely. Daniel finally made it home around 2 in the morning, so exhausted he could barely stand. He found Lily asleep in her bed with Jonah on a pallet beside her, and in the spare room, Ethan slept in the bed that had been Jonah's for the past 2 weeks. 3 children in his house now. 3 children who'd been strangers less than a month ago. Daniel sat on the porch in the darkness, too wired to sleep despite his exhaustion. The night was warm and full of cricket song. The stars spread overhead in their familiar patterns. Everything looked the same as it always had. But nothing was the same. Nothing would ever be the same again. Tom Bradley found him there an hour later, riding up quietly and tying his horse to the rail. "Figured you'd be awake," he said, joining Daniel on the steps. "Can't shut my brain off." "I know the feeling." Tom pulled out a flask and offered it. Daniel took a drink. Whiskey, smooth and burning. "Hell of a thing we just did. Hell of a thing. Those kids are going to need homes, families, 41 children, and most of them orphans with nowhere to go." Daniel had been trying not to think about that. "What's going to happen to them?" "Town meeting's set for tomorrow. We're going to figure it out together. See who can take how many, what resources we need, how to integrate them." Tom paused. Sarah Chen's already claimed 3 of the younger girls. Pastor Williams and his wife want to take in 4 boys. I talked to my wife. We're thinking we can handle 2. "That's good. Daniel's throat went tight. "That's real good of everyone." "What about you?" "What about me?" "You've already got 2, Jonah and now Ethan. You planning to keep them?" Daniel hadn't let himself think about it directly, but hearing it said out loud made the answer obvious. Yeah, I think I am." "You sure? That's a big commitment. 2 traumatized boys on top of raising Lily alone." "I'm not sure of anything except that those boys have nowhere else to go, and I'm not sending them back to some orphanage to maybe get sold again to some other bastard like Rourke." Daniel took another drink from the flask. "Besides, Lily would never forgive me if I let Jonah leave. She's decided he's her brother now." Tom smiled. "She's her mother's daughter." "That she is." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, passing the flask back and forth, not saying much because there wasn't much that needed saying. Finally, Tom stood, stretching. "Get some sleep, Daniel. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "They're all long days now." "True enough. But at least they're good long days. Days that mean something." After Tom left, Daniel sat alone for a while longer, thinking about everything that had happened. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a widowed rancher trying to raise 1 daughter and not think too hard about the loneliness. Now he was, what? A father to 3? A reluctant hero? A man who'd shot someone and might still face consequences for it? He didn't know, but he knew that inside his house, 3 children were sleeping safely for the first time in longer than they could remember. And that had to count for something. Daniel went inside finally, checking on each child before heading to his own room. They all slept soundly. Lily sprawled across her bed like a starfish, Jonah curled tight even in sleep, Ethan flat on his back with 1 arm thrown over his eyes. 3 children. 3 chances to get this right. Daniel lay down in his own bed and closed his eyes. Outside, the summer night pressed close. Inside, his house creaked and settled around its new occupants. Somewhere between one breath and the next, exhaustion finally claimed him. He dreamed of Margaret. She stood in a field of tall grass, the wind moving through her hair, and she was smiling. "You did good," she said, though he couldn't hear her voice, just knew the words somehow. You did real good, Daniel. Stop worrying. When he woke the next morning to the sound of children's voices in the kitchen, Lily explaining the intricacies of chicken care, while Ethan and Jonah listened with patient amusement, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate kind that breaks at the first setback, but the solid, earned kind that comes from surviving the worst and finding yourself still standing on the other side. The day of reckoning was coming. There would be a trial. Rourke would fight. Legal battles loomed. But for now, in this moment, there were children making breakfast and arguing over how much syrup was too much syrup, and that was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything. The courthouse stood at the center of Silver Ridge like a declaration of intent. 2 stories of brick and timber that represented the promise of justice, even when justice felt impossible. Daniel stood on its steps 6 weeks after the raid on Black Creek Valley, watching townspeople file inside for what everyone was calling the trial of the decade. The summer heat had finally broken. September brought cooler air and the smell of coming autumn, and with it came the reckoning that had been building since the day he cut the rope from Jonah's waist. "You ready for this?" Tom Bradley asked, appearing at Daniel's elbow in his Sunday suit. "No," Daniel admitted, "but we're doing it anyway." Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity, every seat filled, people standing along the walls, faces Daniel recognized from town, mixed with strangers who'd traveled from Helena and beyond to witness this spectacle. The territorial newspapers had been running the story for weeks. Child labor ring exposed, mining baron faces justice, frontier town battles, corruption. Victor Rourke sat at the defendant's table with 3 expensive lawyers from back east, men in tailored suits who looked supremely confident despite their client's circumstances. Rourke himself had recovered from his shoulder wound, though he wore the arm in a sling for sympathy. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His expression was calm, almost bored, like this was a minor inconvenience rather than a fight for his freedom. Across the aisle, the prosecution table held Territorial Attorney General Marcus Webb, a bulldog of a man who'd made his reputation fighting corruption. He'd taken this case personally when the evidence landed on his desk, driven by what he told Daniel was simple fury at what had been done to children. Judge Harrison presided, not Judge Merrick, who'd recused himself after Sheriff Hastings presented evidence of financial connections between Merrick and Rourke's mining operations. Harrison was older, gray-bearded, with eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for fairness that had brought him out of retirement for this case. Daniel took his seat in the gallery between Lily and Ethan. Jonah sat on Ethan's other side, flanked by Sarah Chen, who'd become something like a grandmother to all 3 children. The boys wore new clothes donated by the town, their hair trimmed, their faces fuller than they'd been 6 weeks ago. But the nervousness was still there, visible in the way Jonah's leg bounced and Ethan's hands clenched in his lap. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Harrison entered and the courtroom stood. When everyone was seated again, the judge surveyed the packed room with those sharp eyes. "This court is now in session," he said, his voice carrying to the back row. "Mr. Webb, you may begin." The Attorney General stood, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, the territory will prove that Victor Rourke operated a criminal enterprise under the guise of a legal guardianship, that he enslaved children through forced labor, that he directly caused the deaths of at least 2 minors, and that he systematically abused his position of authority for financial gain while hiding behind fraudulent legal documents." One of Rourke's lawyers, a thin man named Cartwright, rose smoothly. "Your Honor, the defense will demonstrate that Mr. Rourke operated a legitimate vocational training program authorized by proper legal channels, that the children in his care were treated humanely according to the standards of the time, and that this prosecution is nothing more than a politically motivated attack on a successful businessman." "Save your opening statements for the jury," Harrison said dryly. "We're here for preliminary arguments on the admissibility of evidence. Mr. Webb?" What followed was 3 hours of legal wrangling. Could the ledger be admitted when it was seized without a proper warrant? Were the children's testimonies reliable, given their ages and circumstances? What about the medical evidence Doc Morrison had compiled? Daniel watched Rourke throughout, studying the man's face for any crack in that calm facade. But Rourke sat unmoved, occasionally whispering to his lawyers, looking more annoyed than worried. Finally, Judge Harrison ruled. The ledger was admissible. The inspection warrant provided sufficient legal authority for its seizure. The children's testimonies would be allowed with appropriate considerations for their ages. The medical evidence stood. "We'll convene the jury trial in 2 weeks," Harrison announced. "Mr. Rourke, you'll remain in custody. Bail is denied given the severity of the charges and your financial resources." For the first time, Rourke's composure cracked. "Your Honor, I have business interests that require my attention. Then I suggest you appoint someone to manage them, because you're not leaving that jail cell until this trial concludes." Harrison banged his gavel. Court adjourned. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed. Daniel tried to push through with the children, but questions came from all directions. "Mr. Harper, how does it feel to be a hero? What would you say to other children in similar situations? Do you think justice will be served?" Sheriff Hastings appeared, using his bulk to clear a path. "No comment. Let them through." They made it to Tom's wagon and climbed in. As they pulled away from the courthouse, Jonah finally spoke. He looked so calm, like he doesn't think anything bad will happen to him. "Men like Rourke always think they're untouchable," Daniel said, "but the evidence doesn't lie." "Evidence didn't matter before," Ethan said quietly. "Judge Merrick saw the same guardianship papers, heard the same stories about the orphanage. He signed us over anyway. Judge Harrison isn't Judge Merrick." "How do you know?" It was a fair question. Daniel didn't have a good answer except gut feeling and desperate hope. The 2 weeks before trial felt like holding your breath underwater. The town buzzed with speculation and gossip. More reporters arrived. A photographer from a Helena newspaper took pictures of the rescued children, with their families' permission, that would run alongside articles about the case. Daniel spent those weeks trying to build something resembling normal life. The boys were enrolled in school. Though Ethan's education had been interrupted for so long, he was placed with students 4 years younger. He bore it with quiet dignity, determined to catch up. Jonah struggled with nightmares still, waking several times a week screaming about darkness and collapsing tunnels. But slowly, incrementally, he was healing. Lily appointed herself their protector and tour guide, showing them every corner of town, introducing them to everyone she knew, filling their days with her relentless cheerfulness until even Ethan smiled occasionally. The other rescued children were settling in too, distributed among families throughout Silver Ridge and neighboring towns. Some adapted quickly, others struggled. Doc Morrison reported that 3 children had serious long-term health issues from the mine, lung damage that would affect them for life. Mara was learning to walk again on her newly healed leg, staying with Pastor Williams and his wife, who'd fallen in love with her fierce spirit. Sarah Chen organized a community fund to support the families who'd taken in children, collecting donations and coordinating resources. The response was overwhelming. Apparently there was something about rescued children that opened wallets and hearts. But underneath all this normalcy, tension built toward the trial. The night before it began, Daniel found Ethan sitting on the porch in the darkness, staring toward the mountains. "Can't sleep?" Daniel asked, settling into the rocking chair beside him. "Thinking about tomorrow, about testifying." The prosecution had called Ethan as their first witness after opening statements. The boy who'd held the others together, who'd sacrificed himself for his brother, who'd seen everything and could articulate it clearly. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," Daniel said. "Webb has other witnesses." "No, I need to." Ethan's voice was firm. "For Marcus and Sarah, for all the ones who can't speak for themselves. Someone has to tell the truth about what happened there. It won't be easy. Rourke's lawyers will try to tear your testimony apart." "Let them try." Ethan turned to look at Daniel, and in the lamplight from the house, his eyes showed that same defiance Daniel had seen in the mining camp. "I've survived 2 years in hell. I can survive a few lawyers." The trial began on a crisp Monday morning with the courtroom even more packed than before. The jury had been selected, 12 men, most of them fathers, all of them looking grim and determined as they took their seats. Attorney General Webb's opening statement was powerful and concise. He laid out the timeline of Rourke's operation, the fraudulent guardianship papers, the conditions at the mine, the deaths of Marcus Williams and Sarah Chen. He described child slavery in clinical terms that made it impossible to ignore or romanticize. Cartwright's opening for the defense was smoother, more polished. He painted a picture of a misunderstood businessman trying to help orphaned children, of a vocational training program that taught valuable skills, of tragic accidents that occurred despite best efforts. He suggested that the real criminals were the lawmen who'd staged an illegal raid and the rancher who'd kidnapped a child in the marketplace. Then Webb called his first witness. The territory calls Ethan Blake. Ethan stood from where he'd been sitting with Daniel and the others. He walked to the witness stand with his head high, placed his hand on the Bible for the oath, and sat down. Webb approached gently. Please state your name and age for the record. Ethan Blake. I'm 14 years old. And how long were you held at Victor Rourke's mining operation? 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. The precision of the answer sent a ripple through the courtroom. People exchanged glances. Even Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. How do you know so exactly? Webb asked. I kept count, scratched marks on the wall beside my bunk. 1 mark for every day. It was the only way to remember that time was passing, that eventually something might change. Tell us how you came to be at the mine. Ethan's testimony was clear and devastating. He described the orphanage, the official-looking man who came with promises of opportunity, the wagon ride into the mountains. He described the first day at the mine, the shock of realization that they'd been sold, the fear when they understood no one was coming to save them. He described the work, 12-hour shifts in darkness, children as young as 6 sorting rocks until their fingers bled, the quotas that had to be met or food was withheld, the beatings for those who couldn't keep up. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even Rourke's lawyers had stopped taking notes. Tell us about Marcus Williams, Webb said quietly. Ethan's voice wavered but held. Marcus was 10, small for his age but brave. He couldn't take it anymore, the darkness, the beatings, the hunger. One night he ran, made it almost a mile before the guards caught him. What happened when they brought him back? They beat him, in the courtyard, made all of us watch. Ethan's hands clenched. Jack Reeves did most of it, used a belt with a buckle. Marcus was crying, begging them to stop, but they didn't stop until he couldn't stand anymore. Several jury members looked ill. One woman in the gallery was crying openly. And then? They left him in the barracks, wouldn't let Doc Morrison come up from town, said Marcus needed to learn his lesson. Ethan's voice broke. He died 2 weeks later. They said pneumonia, but it was from the beating. We all knew it was from the beating. Did you report this to anyone? Any authority? Who would we report it to? We were in the middle of nowhere. The guards worked for Rourke. The sheriff in town had never come to check on us. As far as we knew, we'd been forgotten. Until your brother escaped. Until Jonah ran. He was my little brother, 9 years old and braver than anyone I'd ever known. Ethan looked across the courtroom to where Jonah sat. I created a distraction so he could slip away during shift change. Told him to find help. Didn't think, his voice cracked. Didn't think he'd actually make it, but he did. Webb let that statement hang in the air. Then, your witness. Cartwright stood, all polished confidence. Mr. Blake, isn't it true that you were a discipline problem at the orphanage? Multiple reports of fighting and insubordination? I fought with boys who were bullying smaller kids. I'd do it again. And when you arrived at Mr. Rourke's facility, you continued this pattern of defiance and rule-breaking? I continued protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. You described the work as slavery, but weren't you being taught valuable mining skills, skills that could lead to employment? We were children, working 12-hour shifts in dangerous conditions, being beaten if we complained. That's not education, that's slavery. Mister, Rourke had legal guardianship papers, papers signed by a judge who took money to look the other way, Ethan shot back. Everyone knew what was happening. They just didn't care because we were orphans, disposable. Objection, Cartwright said. Speculation about Judge Merrick's motivations. Sustained, Harrison said. The witness will stick to what he personally observed. But the damage was done. The jury had heard it. The courtroom had heard it. Cartwright tried several more angles, questioning Ethan's memory, suggesting he was exaggerating, implying he'd been coached by the prosecution. But Ethan held firm, answering each question with calm precision that made him seem far older than 14. Finally, Cartwright gave up. No further questions. The witness may step down, Harrison said. Ethan returned to his seat beside Daniel. His hands were shaking, but his face was set with grim satisfaction. He'd done it. He'd told the truth. Over the next 3 days, Webb called witness after witness. Doc Morrison testified about the medical conditions he'd documented: malnutrition, untreated injuries, respiratory damage from breathing mine dust. Sheriff Hastings described finding the ledger and the evidence of deaths. Tom Bradley talked about the condition of the children when they were rescued. Then came the children themselves. One by one, kids took the stand and described their experiences. Some were articulate like Ethan. Others could barely speak through their tears. But each testimony added weight to the prosecution's case. Little Mara limped to the stand on her healing leg and showed the jury her scars. "They said I was clumsy," she said in her small voice. "But the cart was overloaded and the brakes were broken. It wasn't my fault it ran over my foot." "Did anyone help you after the accident?" Webb asked gently. "Ethan carried me to the barracks. The other kids brought me water. But, mister, Rourke said doctors cost money, and I'd heal or I wouldn't." She looked at the jury. "My foot still hurts sometimes. Doc Morrison says it always will." When the prosecution rested, Rourke's defense called their witnesses. They brought mining consultants who testified that the conditions were standard for the industry, character witnesses who described Rourke as a pillar of the community, a retired judge who defended the guardianship process. But none of it could erase what the jury had heard from the children themselves. On the 6th day, Rourke took the stand in his own defense. He was polished and confident, describing his operation as a charitable endeavor to help orphan children. He claimed the children were well fed and cared for, that the work was appropriate training, that any injuries were unfortunate accidents in a dangerous profession. "I gave those children hope," he said earnestly, "a future. Without my program, they'd have rotted in orphanages or died on the streets." "Even the ones who died in your mine?" Webb asked during cross-examination. "Tragic accidents. We mourned every loss." "You mourned them by sealing the tunnel and getting back to work?" "The mine is dangerous. We couldn't afford to stop operations every time something went wrong." "Something went wrong. That's how you describe 3 children dying in a cave-in caused by inadequate supports?" Rourke's mask slipped slightly. "The supports met industry standards. Did they meet safety standards for children?" "There are no separate standards." "Exactly." Webb's voice rose. "There are no standards because children shouldn't be working in mines in the first place. They should be in school, playing, being children." "Objection," Cartwright called. "Counsel is arguing rather than questioning." "Sustained. Move on, Mr. Webb." But again, the jury had heard it. The point was made. Webb pulled out the ledger, marked as Exhibit A. "Mr. Rourke, is this your ledger?" "It appears to be, yes." "And these entries here, can you explain them?" Webb read aloud. "Marcus Williams, age 10, deceased at net loss $300. Sarah Chen, age 8, deceased, net loss $400. Is that how you valued these children? As financial assets?" "That's standard bookkeeping. Standard bookkeeping for livestock, maybe. Not for human beings." Webb's voice was sharp as glass. "You kept track of these children the same way you'd track mining equipment. When they died, you calculated your financial loss." Rourke's composure was cracking. "You're twisting the meaning." "Am I?" "Because it seems pretty clear to me. These weren't children to you. They were property, tools, disposable resources to be used up and replaced. That's not... How many more children would have died if we hadn't shut you down, Mr. Rourke? How many more entries would have been added to this ledger?" "Objection!" Cartwright was on his feet. "Speculation. Withdrawn." Webb closed the ledger. "No further questions." The closing arguments came on day 7. Cartwright spoke for 2 hours, painting Rourke as a scapegoat for society's failure to care for orphans, arguing that the prosecution had manufactured outrage over standard industrial practices. Webb's closing was shorter and more powerful. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not complicated. It's not about industrial standards or guardianship law or proper procedures. It's about right and wrong. It's about 43 children who were sold into slavery under the cover of legal paperwork. It's about 2 children who died and were recorded in a ledger as financial losses. It's about a man who saw vulnerable children and saw opportunity for profit. He pointed at Rourke. That man claims he was helping orphans, but helping doesn't look like 12-hour shifts in darkness. It doesn't look like beatings for those who can't keep up. It doesn't look like calculated financial losses when children die. Webb turned back to the jury. You've heard the testimony. You've seen the evidence. You've looked into the faces of the children who survived and the families of those who didn't. The question before you is simple. Will you hold this man accountable? Will you say that in Montana territory, children are not property to be exploited? Will you choose justice? He sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Harrison gave the jury their instructions. They filed out to deliberate while everyone else waited. 1 hour passed. Then 2. Daniel sat with the children, watching the clock, feeling each minute stretch like taffy. What if they don't convict him? Jonah whispered. They will, Daniel said with more confidence than he felt. But what if they don't? Ethan took his brother's hand. Then we survive anyway. We tell people what happened. We make sure it can't happen again. We don't give up. 3 hours. 4. The sun was setting when word came that the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone filed back into the courtroom. The jury took their seats, faces unreadable. Rourke stood with his lawyers, his expression finally showing strain. Has the jury reached a verdict? Harrison asked. The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of involuntary servitude, how do you find? Guilty. A wave of sound swept the courtroom, gasps, murmurs, one woman's sob of relief. Harrison gavelled for silence. On the charge of child endangerment resulting in death? Guilty. On the charge of fraud and conspiracy? Guilty. Guilty on all counts. Every single charge. Rourke's face went white. His lawyers were already conferring, no doubt planning appeals. But for now, in this moment, justice had been served. Harrison banged his gavel. Victor Rourke, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers on all counts. Sentencing will be held 1 week from today. Until then, you'll remain in custody. He looked at Rourke with open disgust. And may I say, sir, that in 30 years on the bench, I have never encountered a case that turned my stomach quite like yours. You took vulnerable children and treated them as less than human. You profited from their suffering and discarded them when they were no longer useful. Whatever sentence I impose will not be sufficient to balance the scales of what you've done. He banged the gavel again. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted. People were crying, cheering, embracing. Daniel found himself pulled into a hug by Tom Bradley, then Sarah Chen, then Doc Morrison. The children clustered together, Ethan and Jonah holding on to each other while Lily jumped up and down with joy. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the rescued children and their families gathered in the cooling evening air. Someone started singing, one of the songs Sarah Chen used to sing in the mine, her voice carrying the memory. Others joined in, and soon 40 voices rose together, children who'd survived hell singing into the Montana twilight. Daniel stood apart slightly, watching them, feeling the weight of the past 2 months settle into something like peace. Sheriff Hastings appeared beside him. We did it. You did it. All of you. Don't sell yourself short, Daniel. This started with you cutting that rope in the market square. And it could have ended with all of us dead in that valley. But it didn't. It ended with justice. Hastings paused. What are you going to do now? Daniel looked at his children, because that's what they were now, all 3 of them. Lily sandwiched between the brothers, all of them singing. Raise them, love them, try to give them the childhood they should have had. That's a tall order. Most things worth doing are. The sentencing hearing 1 week later was brief. Judge Harrison sentenced Rourke to 20 years in territorial prison with no possibility of parole. The guards who'd participated in the abuse received varying sentences based on their involvement. Jack Reeves, who'd beaten Marcus Williams, got 15 years. Judge Merrick was quietly asked to resign. An investigation into his financial dealings with Rourke was ongoing. The guardianship documents were formally voided. The rescued children were declared free. Their custody transferred to the families who'd taken them in, or for those without placements, to a new territorial orphanage with strict oversight. Rourke's mining operation was shut down permanently. The entrance was sealed, the buildings torn down. Within a year, Black Creek Valley would be reclaimed by wilderness, the only evidence of what happened there being the small graves marked with wooden crosses that Sheriff Hastings had insisted on before they left. Life in Silver Ridge slowly returned to normal, though normal had changed fundamentally. The town that had learned to look away from injustice had learned to look directly at it instead. People were more watchful now, more willing to speak up, more conscious of the vulnerable in their midst. Daniel's ranch became home to 3 children instead of 1. They added on a room for the boys, expanded the barn to handle more livestock, planted a bigger garden because feeding 3 kids was substantially different from feeding 1. The nightmares persisted for months, especially for Jonah, but they grew less frequent, less violent. Daniel would hear crying in the night and go sit with whichever boy was struggling, offering presents if not answers. Ethan threw himself into education with fierce determination, catching up on years of missed schooling. The teacher said he was the hardest working student she'd ever seen. By Christmas, he'd advanced 2 grade levels. Jonah discovered a talent for drawing. He filled sketchbooks with pictures of the ranch, the animals, his family, never the mine. He couldn't bring himself to draw those memories. But Daniel found the sketches of chickens and horses and Lily's laughing face tucked all over the house. Lily appointed herself the emotional center of their new family, the one who insisted on Friday night dinners all together, who organized outings to the creek, who made sure nobody stayed sad for too long. On a warm evening in early October, Daniel sat on the porch watching his children play in the yard. Lily was teaching the boys how to play some complicated game involving hopping and throwing stones. Their laughter carried across the ranch, mixing with the sound of evening birds and the distant lowing of cattle. Sarah Chen appeared, walking up from town with a basket of fresh bread. She'd become a regular visitor, drawn by affection for the children and perhaps by companionship for Daniel, whose loneliness she seemed to understand without him having to name it. "They look happy," she said, settling into the rocking chair beside him. "They're getting there." "You all are?" Daniel smiled. "Yeah, I suppose we are." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. The summer that had started with a question in a dusty market square was giving way to autumn, and with it came the promise of seasons continuing, life moving forward, wounds healing even if scars remained. "Daddy," Lily called. "Come play with us." "Yeah, Mr. Harper," Jonah added, his voice stronger than it had been months ago. Ethan just smiled and waited. Daniel stood, feeling the ache in his joints that came from hard work and harder choices, and walked down to join his children in the yard. Sarah followed, and soon they were all playing together. This patchwork family built from grief and rescue and the simple decision to care when caring was hard. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, they moved inside for dinner. The kitchen table that had seemed too large for just Daniel and Lily now felt exactly right with 5 people crowded around it. They ate and talked and laughed. And for long stretches, it was possible to forget the darkness that had brought them together. Later, after the children were in bed, Daniel stood at Jonah's door watching the boys sleep. The nightmares weren't gone entirely, probably never would be. But tonight Jonah slept peacefully, curled on his side with one hand tucked under his cheek. Ethan appeared beside him. "He's doing better." "You both are." "Thanks to you." "Thanks to a lot of people, a whole town, really." "But it started with you." Ethan paused. "I've been thinking about something, about what I want to do when I'm older." "What's that?" "Law. I want to study law so I can fight for kids like us. Make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to others." Daniel looked at the boy, this fierce, brilliant 14-year-old who'd survived hell and come out determined to change the world. "You'll be good at it." "I hope so." Ethan glanced toward where Jonah slept. "He asked me yesterday if we could stay here forever, if this was really home." "What did you tell him?" "I told him yes, if you'll have us." Daniel's throat went tight. "I'll have you, both of you, for as long as you want to stay." "Then this is home." Ethan said it simply, like he was stating a fact as immutable as the turning of seasons or the rising of the sun. That night, Daniel dreamed of Margaret again. But this time, she wasn't alone in that field of tall grass. 3 children ran around her, Lily with her wild hair, Jonah with his quiet smile, Ethan with his serious eyes. Margaret looked at Daniel across the dream distance and nodded, as if to say, "Yes, this is right. This is what I wanted for you." When Daniel woke, the house was quiet except for the usual settling sounds and the distant call of an owl. He lay in bed thinking about everything that had happened since that summer day in the market square, about the rope around a boy's waist and the peppermint candy offered in kindness, about the choice to act when others looked away, about the cost and the grace and the unexpected family built from the wreckage of other people's cruelty. It hadn't been easy. It wasn't over. The boys would carry scars forever, and there would be hard days ahead. But they'd survived. They'd found each other. They'd built something worth protecting, and in the end, maybe that was all anyone could ask for. Not perfection, not the erasure of pain, just survival and hope, and the daily choice to keep going, to keep caring, to keep believing that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. The first light of dawn crept through the window. Daniel rose and dressed and went to start breakfast. Soon the children would wake. Soon the day would begin with all its ordinary miracles: eggs frying, coffee brewing, voices raised in complaint or laughter or both. Soon, but not yet. For now, Daniel had these quiet moments to himself. He stood at the kitchen window looking out at his land, at the barn where horses shifted in their stalls, at the chicken coop where Lily's hens were beginning to stir. A ranch in Montana territory. A widower and his daughter. Two boys pulled from darkness into light. A town that had learned to see what it had been ignoring. Not a perfect ending, not even a complete one. Just people trying, failing, trying again. Just ordinary folks doing their best in a world that asked too much and gave too little. But sometimes, on mornings like this, when the light was just right and the air held the promise of cooler weather, it felt like enough. It felt like everything. Outside, the chickens began their morning chatter. The horses whinnied for their breakfast. And inside Daniel's house, 3 children slept safely under his roof, anchored to this place and this life by something as simple and revolutionary as the decision to care. The summer rope had been cut. The children had been freed. The guilty had been punished. And in a small ranch house on the Montana frontier, a family that had been broken had learned to heal together. That was the story. That was the truth. That was the summer that changed everything. And it all began with one small voice in a dusty market square, one child offering kindness to another, and one man deciding that this time, this one time, he wouldn't look away.